Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Planning and Highway Committee today. First item on the agenda is to welcome. I'm Councillor Peter Price, the member for Shire Green Brightside, and I will chair this planning committee. On this top bench with me are officers who are going to advise members on their decision. Now, just whip round the members so they can introduce themselves, tell us which part of the city they represent. I'll start with Peter. Brian? Yeah, just press.
Shall I do it, Chair, while we're waiting to get round and we go back round to Brian?
I could speak up, if that's acceptable.
So, my name is Councillor Diane Hurst. I represent Richmond Ward.
Apologies to everybody. We have a few snags with this. It's all a new system to us.
Yeah, I'm Councillor Richard Williams. I represent Stannington.
Councillor Gary Weatherall, Shire Green and Brightside Ward.
Richard, you're coming. Rich, introduce yourself.
I'm Councillor Diane Hurst. I represent Richmond Ward.
Zahira Nazdana Ward.
Councillor Tim Huggan, Crooks and Crosspool Ward.
Yeah.
Councillor Tony Downing, Mosby Ward.
Roger.
Councillor Alan Woodcock, East Ecclesfield.
Councillor Andrew Sanger, Forward Ward.
Councillor Chris Rosling-Josephs from Bayton Ward.
Can I ask Abby to go through the housekeeping arrangements, please?
Thank you, Chair. To help keep everyone safe, please maintain social distancing at all times. Please wear a face covering at all times within the venue, unless you have an exemption. It can be removed once seated, but you may wish to leave it on. Hand sanitizer will be available for you to use. Please remain seated as much as possible during the meeting and do not congregate round exits and entrances. Follow any signage which is provided, such as one-way systems, to help keep you safe. If you have any concerns or are unsure, please ask a member of staff. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards. The assembly point is Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Abby. Have we any apologies to register?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have got apologies from Councillor Tony Dams and Councillor Tony Downing is substitute. And we've also got apologies from Councillor Bob McCann and Councillor Tim Huggan is substituting. Thank you.
There are no items of exclusion of public and press. Item 4, any declarations of interest? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. This is regarding 7.7a Spout House. I noticed in the objections that a group called the Friends of Loxley Valley have objected to this. I am a member of that group, but I would like to reassure this committee that at no point have I had any discussions with any member of that group about this application.
Thank you. Yes, Ben.
Right, declaration of interest on item 7D at 15 Brockwell Bank. I have previously objected to this prior to becoming a councillor. So it's a declaration of interest.
You'll not be able to take part in that. You understand that? Fine.
Yes, yes, that's fine. It's fine, Peter.
Roger. Any more? No? Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting, pages 9 to 14. I'll quickly whip through them. If anybody wants to jump in, if there's any alterations or corrections. Page 9. So, well, there's two, isn't there? There's the 19th one. On page 11, 12, 13, and 14. Okay, we'll see those. We'll leave the site visit until later. So if people require, if we require one, then we'll go for the date then, the usual date, no doubt. Item 7, the application of the various acts and regulations. Item 7A, application 20/01930 for Spout House at Spout Lane. Dan is going to take us through it. Okay?
Thank you, Chair. Could you go on to slide 5, please? Keep going. Next one. Another one. Next one. Thank you. Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, thank you, Chair. This slide shows the site boundary of a 2.5-acre site located at the edge of Stannington, at the southern end of Spout Lane, close to the junction with Stannington Road, which runs across the bottom of the screen. The site lies in a designated housing area, and farmland to the west is designated as Greenbelt and an area of high landscape value. Next slide, please. This application relates to Spout House, which is a 17th century Grade 2 listed building located at the northern end of, and the lower northern end of the site. It has 2 existing curtilage buildings. There is an annex adjacent to the eastern site boundary, known as the stables, and another on the north, known as the cowshed or dairy. The site also has 2 existing access points, one to the southeast and another to the northwest. You can see that this is an historic aerial photograph, although it's quite tricky to see, because the house, as described in the committee report, was very badly damaged by fire in 2016. The curtilage buildings and the site in general are also in a poor state of repair due to lack of maintenance and management. Next slide. So this is a view looking south, down the hill towards Spout House. The house is scaffolded, as you can see there. On the next slide, you can see a closer view of the principal elevation of Spout House and its eastern gable. This is a view looking south, back up the hill, along the driveway, with Spout House on the right and the stables outbuilding on the left. This is a view of the west-facing elevation of the stables. A view looking south onto what will be the garden area of Spout House. This is a photo taken from the eastern side of Spout House. It's looking north towards the site boundary and to the rear of properties on Spout Copse. And you can just see, if you look closely, you can see the eastern end of the dairy in the midground. This is a view looking west at the northeast corner of Spout House, with the dairy to the right. Just note that the dairy is not being extended, but a pitched roof is proposed along that eastern wing, which is to the right of the photograph. This is a view of the western gable of Spout House in the foreground, where it meets the southern end of the dairy. This is an internal shot of Spout House. There's another showing the extent of damage to the roof. This is a view looking south at the garden area of plot 3, again looking back at the hill. And finally, this is a view looking west across the site towards the green belt. As you know, planning permission and listed building consent are sought for the restoration and extension of Spout House, alterations and extensions to the curtilage buildings to form an annex to Spout House and a new house on plot 2, and the erection of a new house on plot 3. This is a proposed plan of Spout House. You can see that the original T-shaped plan is retained. A single-storey lean-to in the northwest corner is being replaced, and a new single-storey contemporary extension is added in the northeast corner. Here you can see Spout House in elevation. The principal elevation is on the top left, and on the rear elevation on the bottom right of the picture there, you can see the replacement lean-to on the right-hand side and the contemporary glazed extension on the left. This is a three-dimensional view of the rear of Spout House, showing both of the single-storey additions. This is a proposed plan for the conversion of the stables into an annex to Spout House. No extensions are proposed, and only one new opening is proposed on the northern gable. Windows on the eastern boundary will be obscure glazed to protect the privacy of neighbours on Acorn Drive. This is the stables in elevation. This slide shows an existing building, to the north of the stables, which is going to be altered to create a garage for plot 1. These are the proposed floor plans for the dairy. The footprint is not being extended, but as I've previously described, a roof is being added to the northern wing, and also an existing high-level window in the northern gable is being filled in, and a new roof on the western wing will result in about 10 centimetres being added to the height of the building. This is the dairy in elevation. You can see the new roof to the northern wing, and only one window in the northern elevation. This is a three-dimensional view of the south and eastern elevations of the dairy. It creates a courtyard to the side of the house. To enable the restoration of the listed building, a new house is planned on plot 3. This will be on the western side of Spout House. Its linear form, which you can see here, is considered to reflect that of a traditional farm building. Due to the falling ground levels, it will have a single storey to the south elevation and 2 to the north elevation. And a new partially sunken flat roof garage will serve plot 3. And all elements of the scheme can be seen in this three-dimensional view. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see Spout House in the centre. That's plot 1. You can see the annex to Spout House, known as the stables, to the right-hand side. You can see the converted dairy, which is plot 2, to the rear, and the new dwelling house on plot 3 to the left, with its facade slightly set back behind the principal elevation of Spout House. Now, apologies, this isn't very clear, but I wanted to show you this drawing. This is the proposed drainage strategy, and those of you that visited the site yesterday will know that the site slopes down quite steeply from the south to the north, and there is an existing stream and wetlands at the top of the site, which is the right-hand side on this plan, and these are going to be retained. They converge at the moment into the pond in the centre of the site. And from here, a new outfall will discharge to a new French drain, which extends across the site. And if you're just in the centre of that plan, it's the dark line, which runs top to bottom. And that will, so the pond will discharge to that French drain, and that will also catch overground flows from across the site. And then, subject to a conditions survey, an existing chamber to the east of Spout House will lead to a new chamber in the northeast corner, which will then discharge to an existing outfall to Acorn Drive. And in the northwest, I'm sorry it's not very clear, but there's an area sort of in between plots 2 and 3 where there'll be a new underground storage tank which will contain water and release it at a controlled rate via an existing riparian ditch. And finally, again, those that visited the site will be aware that the existing plantation of deciduous and coniferous trees is protected by an area tree preservation order, but it has suffered considerably from a lack of management. Consequently, 26 trees need to be removed for arboricultural reasons. They're all category U trees and all in a poor state of health or even have died. 14 further trees will be removed to facilitate the proposed development, and they're mainly category C trees. It's just the one category B tree, and 4 more will be removed to facilitate the proposed drainage strategy. And if you look carefully at that plan, it's not very clear, but those trees highlighting a grey outline, they're the ones being removed. And all of the trees on the site will be retained and protected. And then can I draw members' attention to the supplementary report, please? We received an additional representation, and this representation said that the new drainage strategy was only made publicly available 1 day prior to the committee meeting. It is acknowledged that there is an amendment that will help with regards to surface water, which is the attenuation crates beneath the parking area of plot 2, but that is the only change. The plans still pose a significant threat to flooding of properties on Spout Copse, as they make use of an existing pipe in the garden of number 15, which cannot handle any increase in flow. The representation also says that the removal of any tree protected by TPO should be subject to separate planning permission and assessed on a case-by-case basis by the appropriate department, which they understand to be the correct process. And they also understand that the outbuildings, as well as the main house, have Grade 2 listed status, and conditions should be put in place to ensure that the outbuildings are redeveloped in line with relevant laws applicable to listed buildings. Now, in response to those points, the amended drainage strategy drawing, which was the one on the previous slide, was uploaded yesterday, but it is described in detail in the committee report, and I have to say that that drawing describes an amended strategy only. It's not an approved plan. Detailed drainage proposals are reserved by conditions 3, 4, 5 and 6, and they could result in changes to the strategy. That is the strategy that's been agreed with the lead local flood authority as a way of successfully dealing with the drainage issues that occur on site, but it could be subject to change. I'll also point out that in that strategy and at the request of the lead local flood authority, the use of the existing outflow which runs through the garden of number 15, and if you look at that, if we go back, could we go back a slide? The bottom left-hand side of the plan there, the house nearest that northwest corner, that's number 15, and as I said, there is an existing riparian ditch that runs through their plot. And the lead local flood authority requested that the outflow, which will run into that ditch, be limited to 2 litres per second by the introduction of a flow control chamber within the application site. So, the flow rate out of the site onto that existing ditch will be controlled. And ultimately, as I said before, all drainage details will need to be approved by the lead local flood authority. And then there was the point about the tree protection, protected trees being subject to separate planning permission. A A separate application is not required for the removal of trees protected under the TPO. Only one form of consent is required, and planning permission overrides the TPO. The impact of the development on protected trees has been assessed by the Council's environmental planners and ecologists, and proposed conditions 12 and 13 seek to protect the retained trees, and condition 24 secures replacement tree planting. And then in response to the comment about listed buildings, the law provides that buildings that predate 1948 and are within the curtilage of a listed building are to be treated as part of the listed building, though they are not listed in their own right. The committee report highlights their significance on pages 42 and 43, and the recommended conditions, which seek to protect existing buildings and the quality of the development, apply to both Spout House and the curtilage buildings. And then 2 more points. I've just draw your attention to one condition, condition 30, that can be removed because it's a repeat condition of condition 20. And then finally, we've proposed one additional condition. We did have a sort of general condition on about boundary treatments, retention of the boundary stone walls, and any other boundary treatments proposed to require our approval. But we've added a separate condition saying that the approved dwelling house on plot 2 shall not be brought into use unless a fence designed to protect the amenities of the occupiers of neighbouring properties has been erected along the site's northern boundary in accordance with details to be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. And that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got 2 speakers from the general public. Can you invite Mark Carlisle, who's going to speak against the proposals here? Got to go and fetch him. Hang on. Apologies about this. Mr. Carlisle, I'm here. Welcome to the meeting. Can I apologise for the arrangements? I'm afraid, due to the pandemic rules, I'm having to separate, and so you've got me stuck up here out of the way. Anyway, welcome to our meeting. You want to speak against the current proposal for Spout House. You've got 5 minutes, if that's okay. Can we switch him on?
Oh, there we go. Hi. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for allowing me to speak. I know it was at short notice, so thank you very much for providing me the opportunity. I'd also like to point out that I prepared a statement. It's not a well-prepared statement given the short notice. And I didn't realise the comments that were just read a moment ago were my comments. So apologies, maybe some of the things that I'm going to say will be repeated. In principle, I'm not opposed to the development of the site. I don't think, in my view, it constitutes as being overdeveloped. There's 3 properties. I read that there was 5 properties per hectare. So I don't have opposition against that. I welcome the plans to ensure that Spout House remains the focal point on site, and the change plans to the outbuildings that they more represent the farm buildings and don't take away from Spout House. As I said in the comments, I feel that the listed status maybe have been understated, and I would just request that the committee take that into consideration when making their decision. My chief concern was with regards to drainage. The existing pipework is inadequate and not fit for purpose. There are several water drainage pipes that I'm aware of that are not included on the plans, one of which does run through my property. And I'm afraid any additional pressure on those pipes will just cause or increase the existing problems we already experience. I can express a number of personal experience of drainage problems, but regrettably I don't have time within the 5 minutes. The surface water mitigation plan that you consider will balance flow, But as weather events become more frequent, I would suggest that it's more sensible to have the water piped along the access road to Spout Lane and piped directly into the stream that takes the surface runoff already, therefore sort of bypassing any existing pipe work and avoiding putting unnecessary pressure and risks on pipe work that can't take any extra flow, in my view. The site is rich in both plant and animal life, and as a resident, it's clear that habitat has been significantly damaged already. The council appear to have a conflicting policy with approach to the TPO. There's been a number of trees already removed from site, removed from listing and felled. The 3 trees to the rear of my property are now considered for removal. I've in the past employed a tree surgeon to examine these 3 trees. He stated to me, due to the TPO and the condition of the trees, he wouldn't recommend the removal of those trees. In line with his expert opinion, I only had them felled by 25%, yet now they're being marked for removal. It seems that the removal of these protected trees are based on commercial decisions rather than respecting the purpose of a TPO. In particular, the 3 trees to the rear of my property, rather than widening the entrance to the drive on the property, which is a pinpoint, commercially it seems cheaper just to fell the trees. I'm not a climate activist, but it does appear that the current development site plan and council policy appears to be at odds with the modern government strategy with regards to climate change, which should adhere to protecting a rich environment such as this development site as much as reasonably possible. I do accept that there will be some changes, but we should protect it as much as possible. I hope the committee consider putting conditions in place to take account of my concerns, and I'm happy to take any questions if the committee have, and I thank you again for allowing me to speak on such short notice.
Thank you, Mr. Carlyle. We don't have questions to him unless required. Thanks very much. Can I bring in Mr. Breslin, who's going to speak in favour of the planning application? God, I don't know what it is. Mr. Breslin, welcome to the meeting. Apologies for the situation. I'm afraid the pandemic rules keep us that far apart. But anyway, you've got 5 minutes to speak in favour of the application, sir. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon all. I'd like to start by stating that the huge commitment that has been embarked upon by the client in looking to restore the Grade 2 listed Spout House is an entirely admirable principle I'm sure nobody here objects to. The structure dates back to the late 1800s, and it's a really important part of the special history of the local area. Given the current precarious and fire-damaged nature of the building, it is the client's love and passion for bringing Spout House back to life that is the only thing that is ever likely to save it from eventual ruin. And it is incredibly important to state from the outset that without this application, the chances of Spout House falling into complete ruin is almost certain. One of the biggest tasks during the early stages of the planning process was to establish exactly how this restoration should take place through a series of very detailed discussions with officers. This process has culminated in the production of the 115-page Conservation Management Plan, which surveys the condition and value of each individual architectural feature in the house and recommends a course of work to reinstate them. This document was approved by officers and ensures that the historic integrity of the building will be preserved throughout the redevelopment of the site. It is this conservation management plan which goes a long way to establishing the acceptability of this project, as it removes any risk of an insensitive or heavy-handed approach to restoration. Naturally, enabling development is required to fund this work, and so 2 additional dwellings are proposed, one which reinstates the existing outbuilding to Spout House, extending upwards to create a new dwelling, and one which is a new build. Both of these buildings are of a completely sympathetic design, and are in reality the only way that the extensive restoration of Spout House can be funded. In the interest of prioritising restoration works, a planning condition has been agreed which outlines that the restoration works to Spout House must happen first before building work begins on the other two units. Whilst it has always been the client's intention to fully restore Spout House, this measure was intended to safeguard the restoration works against any unlikely potential financial uncertainty which may arise for the funding of the project in the future, and adds an extra layer of safeguarding to the restoration works. Away from heritage and restoration, one of the main reasons that objections have been lodged against this application were concerns from members of the public over the potential for impact on exacerbating existing drainage issues in the area. Again, this has demanded a great deal of detailed discussion to arrive at a workable drainage solution. At this initial stage, a high-level drainage plan has been arrived at, which details a number of measures, namely the introduction of semi-permeable hard surfacing, along with catch pits in the lower part of the site, which will capture and store excess surface water. This will then be discharged at a rate which will not overwhelm existing drainage outputs and potentially cause localised flooding. On top of this measure, a significant number of pre-commencement conditions ensure that the necessary site investigation works will take place before main building work begins. This will ensure that the drainage strategy remains workable against the specific site constraints. The agreed pre-commencement conditions ensure that the drainage management measures will remain effective and that the project will have no detrimental impact on the drainage for the site or the surrounding area. It is crucial to state that this proposal will actually bring the site's drainage from a position of being completely unmanaged to having had a lot of resources spent on managing it effectively. And so far from potentially making matters worse, introducing a drainage management plan will serve to improve drainage in the area drastically. Unfortunately, in order to facilitate this, the agreed drainage plan, some trees in sight will have to be lost. However, it is important to acknowledge that out of the 44 trees identified as being for removal, 26 are biologically dead and need to be removed anyway for environmental management reasons. Of the remainder, almost all are of a low quality. Work with drainage engineers has confirmed there is simply no way to further minimise the impact on trees and provide the crucial drainage measures. But needless to say, the overall impact in terms of trees and ecology has been scrutinised by officers to ensure an overall net gain. To summarise, in terms of policy, there's a clear and compelling weight of argument firmly in favour of the proposals, which officers have, of course, in this case in particular, scrutinised really thoroughly. The proposals outlined through this application represent a real lifeline for Spout House, without which it looks certain that its long history will come to a sad end. As a result, I'd very strongly urge you to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Okay. Dan, do you want to respond to the...
Thank you, Chair. I think I've covered most of the issues in my preamble. Mr. Carlisle's main concerns were relating to drainage and tree removal. And I think one thing I will just say is it's not for the local planning authority to impose a drainage solution. I mean, the site clearly has problems with drainage, in part due to lack of management and maintenance. And the strategy that's been put forward has been accepted by the LLFA, in fact, designed with them. And any detailed design, again, will be approved by the LLFA and be subject to separate consents. Thank you, Chair.
Questions to members? Roger.
Yes, sorry. Because we had a site...
Well, I was told that we've stopped having these report backs, but, but I mean, most members were there. But if you want to give a report what you saw, you're quite happy to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I couldn't decide whether it was Wuthering Heights or that manor in Jane Eyre that had been burnt down, but it was a very imposing building of some stature at one time, a building that was both commercial and also residential, a very, very large building, very difficult to see from the road, so very, very well hidden and not really invasive of anything. So, because it's in such bad condition and that somebody has come forward to do this, I think people were impressed on the day with what this the ambition of the person that that wanted to develop it. Can I just ask also, because there's two points, are we asking questions on both of them at the same time? Are we?
Both buildings.
Pardon?
Both buildings.
Yeah, we're combining the two.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, would you like me to ask my question? Thank you. It's just to mark, and I know that you've put new development will be permitted, providing that it would provide safe access to the highway network and be provided with appropriate off-street parking and not endanger pedestrian. One of the things I did notice was that there's no pathways there, and there is a difficulty in sight going if you're turning right, either into it or away from it. Is there any proposals to improve that situation?
Mark?
Yeah, Chair. Yeah, you're quite right. I think the vehicular access we've managed to control with conditions. There are conditions that relate to the visibility displays that need to be provided at those two existing access points. And there are some plans that actually detail the dimensions which are acceptable. The full details of the visibility at the southern access will need to be brought forward to be submitted for approval, because I think there'll need to be some minor vegetation removal on the front there to get the required visibility on the southern access. In terms of pedestrian access, you're quite right. On the main road, Spout Lane, this grass verge, and that's the character of it. It's a rural setting. On the drawings that they're marked up, I don't know if you can see behind you, that there is a pathway that leads to Acorn Drive that actually connect the top right-hand corner of the site. You can see a couple of parallel lines behind what look like two parking bays. I'm not quite sure. It might be outbuildings. But the notes on the drawing refer to pedestrian access being available at that location onto Acorn Drive. When I had my site visit, I had a quick look this morning. That's actually where plot 1 would need to present their wheelie bins for a roadside collection. It's just wide enough to get the bins. There's a wheelie bin stood on in the carriageway on Acorn Drive actually when I had my site visit, which the pathway is wide enough for that activity. The wheelie bin collections for plots 2 and 3, they would need to present their bins to the drive that gives access onto Spout Lane. That's quite a flat drive, so that shouldn't be a problem either. So, yeah, pedestrians walking along Spout Lane, not really advised, but there is this, and the plans, and there's a note on the plan, there is the option of gaining access to Acorn Drive.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And my main concern on this one is, and I think it's brilliant that this building is being brought back into use, and without buildings and other buildings as well to go with it. And I've read the plans in great detail. But my main concern really is, and I know Diana said that it's not for the planning department about the drainage, but I am concerned about this. The first speaker who said that all this water will be going through his land, and obviously he's worried about any flooding issues that might implicate his property. So I'm just wondering if anything other than what's in the plan apps is mitigating and in the sense of helping his issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Drainage is clearly a problem, as I've said before, and again, as I said, that is because of lack of maintenance, because of the sort of poor state, lack of tree management in particular, and lack of maintenance of the existing drainage system, which is potentially inadequate. But this strategy not only allows for capturing more of the surface water as it drains across the site and through the wetlands and the stream and from the pond, it does also include controlling the rate of the flow through the existing riparian ditch that goes through the neighbour's land to a reasonable rate. So water, as the water flows across the site, it will be stored in new storage containers below ground, just to the north of plot 3, and then it will be released at a controlled rate. So it should be an improvement, a significant improvement on the existing situation. And as I said, it's not for us to impose a drainage solution. That is a solution that drainage experts have come up with in, working with the lead local flood authority. And it, as a strategy, that is acceptable, and it should see improvements in drainage across and leaving the site.
Thank you. So you're happy that this won't have an impact on this man's property?
It should make the situation better. I mean, I'm not a drainage expert, but it should. The experts have said that this will improve the situation. This is a planned strategy that will control the rate of flow, so it should see improvements.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Sangu.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I want to come back to drainage, but because we're not drainage experts, but it's particularly how it impacts the trees. I mean, we're talking about losing 44 trees here, and I accept most of them are Norway spruce and Scots pine of very little life expectancy or habitat value. So I accept that, but I'm particularly concerned in terms of the plan for drainage's impact on the beech tree T20 and the condition 23, because when we've had similar conditions on other places, we put these conditions in and the tree is still lost. And so I think the question is, what other drainage solutions were looked at? If there are only 3 category A trees and we're going to lose dozens of trees on this site, surely the 3 category A trees, we should have found a drainage solution to protect those. So why in particular are we going for this condition 23, which looks like we're going to put in an inspector to make sure the digger puts the trench in the right place and hope for the best? I mean, I'm paraphrasing somewhat, but I think we could have. I mean, why couldn't we look for a drainage solution that didn't affect the 3 category A trees?
Thank you, Chair. It's a very awkward site. It's on a slope. It's quite wide, and it has trees across its width, and actually has, I think, 3 category A trees. And the solution that's been brought forward is considered to be a sensitive solution because it maintains the stream, the pond, the wetlands, but there's a requirement to catch not only the water from the pond, but the overground flow. And that's what the French drain that runs across the site picks up. Thank you. So it picks up overground flow from the full width of this, almost the full width of the site, and then allows us to control it as it gets closer to the houses to the north. Condition 23 prevents there being any mechanical digger being used in the vicinity of the beech tree T20. It will have to be hand dug. And this was, again, it will have to be supervised by a qualified arboriculturalist, our ecologists are satisfied that this should protect the health and safety of that tree.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a point to check because I think I heard on the site visit yesterday morning, we noticed at the end of the dairy, the northern gable, that there was a wooden door covering an opening in the gable, and there was a question then, there was some discussion then whether or not that would be a window or whether it would be glazed. And I think I've heard Diana say that would be stopped up that window opening. I just wanted to check. It was just a matter of checking the privacy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the elevated window in the gable will be filled in. There will be a window at lower level, and that will be screened by the new condition that requires a fence along the boundary, because it's at fairly low level, then that will prevent views looking into the neighbouring properties.
Lovely, thank you, Chair.
Gary Witherall.
Thanks, Chair. It was just on page 47, when I was looking at it yesterday, and it's been mentioned today about the trees, and we're moving 44 and then another trees. But I can't see any recommendations what the trees, what's going to go back into the site, what they're going to be. I mean, I hope they're not going to be just pines or, silver birch and things like that. They're going to be some kind of, have I missed something in the report? Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Condition 24 secures the replacement of the tree planting in accordance with details that we have to approve. So we will be looking for native species, but we haven't. None have been proposed as yet.
Thank you. A few detailed questions, many of them to do with heritage. So we do have some concerns about the building. I think there's been a lot of work put into this in terms of being thorough and detailed. But my concerns are to do with making sure that it is of good heritage quality when it's finally built or not. So there's mention of an archaeological survey. I was particularly interested in the area of the dairy. So this is what I understand to be a shippen inside of a dairy. It seems to be in good condition. Has there been a survey of that? Full photographic survey, for example? I'm interested in the roof as well. So that seems to be, particularly on the dairy, I notice a prefabricated material which could possibly be asbestos. It seems like 50s or 60s age. And there is a note in one of the people who puts in comment, if I can pick it out, where it's mentioned about there being a need for resident comments, material displaced by the construction should be professionally removed from the site. So I think that might be a reference to that, oblique reference to it. So that's the prefabricated material and the dairy. I think the roof materials would traditionally, if you're talking about a late 18th century building, be locally quarried Yorkshire stone slates. So rather than a Welsh slate. And that would be my preference if a building material was to be used. I'm interested in the boundaries as well. That was mentioned by a few of the residents as well. So the boundary at the moment, there's my concerns, I get this about most building developments, is about building noise, generators, tree removal noise, lorries, cement mixers, machine-driven slate cutting. It's all going to happen on site, so there's potential for a lot of sound to echo off the hillside down onto the houses below. So what is the potential there for any high-quality acoustic fencing on site during construction phase, as well as rather more natural, perhaps, looking features of barriers on the boundaries after it's been constructed as well. Things such as hedgerows, which I think are a lot more preferable than fencing. Have I got any other comments? Yeah, I've also got interest about surface water. I took it to be a stream that was running through the site. There is a stream, yeah, and it comes off onto the footpath at the north end. Yeah, close to where the building is on here. There was certainly a stream. When it says building there was actually a bit of a culvert there, just coming onto the path. So I noted that. Yeah. Any other comments and questions? I think the setting of the building is pretty critical. So, overdevelopment is coming into my mind, but I wait to be apprised of what you think about that one in particular, if you could answer that one, Diana.
Want to respond?
Thank you, Chair. There are lots of points there. One about the quality of the work to the listed buildings, and if you look on both conditions, but specifically the listed building consent application, there are many, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 conditions, so barring the first two, which will be controlling the quality of the work and the detail, the extent of detail that is required to convert these listed buildings, including a full schedule of works, a schedule of all fixtures and fittings, details of all materials, large-scale details, sample panels of proposed masonry, a particular type of mortar mix, specification of brick and stone repair, the roof structure, any new timber, joinery, structural elements. So we're happy, and the Conservation Officer is happy that we can secure a level of detail that will protect the character and the importance of that listed building and its curtilage buildings. The asbestos roof will have to be removed by specialists. It's not a planning issue, it's a construction issue. That's for the contractor to follow the appropriate legislation, health and safety legislation. In terms of the boundaries, condition 18 secures the retention of all the existing stone boundaries and boundary walls. It requires details of any new boundaries to be submitted and approved in writing, and then we have the additional boundary for some additional screening along the northern boundary, but all of that will have to be subject to approval, and I think the report alludes to that having to obviously maintain the significance and character of the site. In terms of construction noise, there is a condition on the planning application for a construction environmental management plan that will help to ensure that site activities are planned and managed to prevent any nuisance and disamenity to neighbouring property occupants, and help to minimise any or reduce any harmful effects on any natural features on the site. We can't rule out any noise. Construction is a noisy activity. There are sort of recommended hours of working, and noise from construction sites is controlled by the Pollution Act. So we can do our bit in conditioning and a construction environmental management plan, but there's also separate legislation in place to control that. In terms of overdevelopment, we normally measure overdevelopment by density of development, by the amount of amenity space each plot has, by car parking, by a sort of other measures of sort of privacy issues, etc. This is a very low density development, necessarily because we want to protect the character and setting of the listed building. Each plot will have at least 3 parking spaces. Each plot will have much more than the minimum required levels of amenity space. So I think in planning terms we're happy that there'll be no overdevelopment of the plot. I think that was it. Thank you.
Go on, mate, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few, most of my queries have already been answered, but I've still got a few outstanding. You say in, I think it's condition number 4, about the 30-year rainfall event. Is that right? Have I got that right? On the possible flooding?
I think I can. There are 4 drainage conditions. There's detailed, and they're a bit repetitive because we wanted to make sure we covered every single possibility. So we've obviously got detailed surface water drainage designs, including calculations and model results. There's reference to using sustainable drainage methods where it's at all possible, and management of any strategy that is brought forward. Condition 4 refers to demonstration of a 30% reduction in surface water in comparison to peak flows. And then there is, yes, there's the additional allowance. So storage shall be provided for a minimum 30-year return period. And then, again, as I said before, the maximum flow rates of surface water disposal in condition 5 are restricted to 2 litres per second. And again, there's another reference to the 30-year period storm. So I think, and then further condition 6, where we've got investigations into the existing culverted watercourse that was referred to earlier. Again, to make sure, to take sort of the, I suppose, the state of that watercourse into account when designing the drainage scheme. So I think we've covered everything.
Okay, thanks very much, but there's a few other things as well. The wildlife that's there, we heard yesterday on the site visit that there was a badger set and that was going to be moved. Yes, I just wondered if the badger family had been notified. I do wonder when these things happen because, you know, you say we're going to put up bat boxes. Well, I've never yet come across a development where bat boxes have been installed and they've been used. And, you know, I've been communicating with people across the country, not just in this area, about this. And you know, whether a badger set, when it's moved, will be still used is a different matter. So I'm quite concerned about that. And the other thing was the highways problem, and I know you've dealt with quite a lot of that already, but I'm worried, very worried, certainly for unit number 1, for the access for emergency vehicles, because at the moment, obviously, that was destroyed by fire. You know, let's pray that it's not going to happen again, but just in case it does, is there sufficient width on the access roads? That's a very steep access road from the top end, from the south end, for emergency vehicles to come down there. And that completes my queries. Thank you.
Anybody else? Can we go into observations then?
I'll come back on the initial points, if that's okay, about the badgers. I'm not going to give any details, but there is a set, and the relocation of that set has been accepted by the South Yorkshire Badger Group and the Wildlife Trust. We have a condition 13, to secure the details of that work and some mitigation measures that were recommended by those organisations. So you know, the relevant organisations are satisfied that it will be done appropriately and it is acceptable. I'll hand over to Mark for the highway query.
Hi, Chair. I don't know the circumstances of the fire that occurred there previously. But the fire brigade like the footprints of new development, new dwellings to be within 45 metres of the public highway, and that's the pumping distances for hoses and such like. The path I referred to in my earlier answer that connects with Acorn Drive, that's within a pipe, a hose, using that would be within 45 metres of the property. I don't know if that path may have been blocked when or usable when the fire occurred. There's also the existing access onto Spout Lane, which would be surfaced and made. It'll be wide enough to accommodate an emergency vehicle if there was a fire there. We'd be able to reverse or drive along there and get to within a reasonable distance. Again, I don't know when the fire occurred if any of these were usable at the time and could be accessed at the time, but yeah, the development is within the distances that are specified.
Thank you, Chair. I have two concerns with this application, although overall I think it's a good one. The first is to do with the dairy. If I've read the report correctly, the power part of the dairy that is running parallel with Acorn Copse, Spout Copse, will have a new roof on it. My concern is the bulk of that, because of the topography, the gardens are much lower, that will be quite detrimental to those residents. So I would flag that up and see if anything can be done about that. The second one refers to plot 3. Again, because of the topography, I'm not sure a fence will be sufficient to overcome possible overlooking from certainly the first floor and possibly even the ground floor into, again, Spout Copse. Thank you.
Donna?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of plot 3, I know the separation distances there are in excess of 21 metres. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the... the new house, a distance of over 25 metres will be maintained between the new house and the rear of properties on Spout Copse, and that's well in excess of our 21 metre guidance. And their garden area is largely to the south. And with the new condition requiring a fence along that boundary, we're satisfied that there'll be no loss of amenity as a result of the proposed development. In terms of the dairy, yes, there is a new roof going on there. The land is higher than Spout Copse, but because the dairy is single storey with a roof, a pitched roof that sort of moves away from the boundary, that roof, that single storey building will still be 4.5 metres away from the common boundary. And then there's another 7 or 8 metres, it varies along the length of the northern boundary, on the other side, that we get in excess of the 12 metres. Even if we had a comparable 2-storey element, and I don't think it probably is, but it could be, then we're within the guidelines in terms of avoiding significant overbearing impacts. And I think you've got to remember that, from those properties on Spout Copse, the land does rise to the south. There are trees and have historically been trees and buildings there that will affect their outlook and the light reaching their rear elevation. And I don't think that the erection of a pitched roof on top of that element will have a significant impact.
Okay, observations. Diana.
Thank you, Chair. I must say, I do welcome this application for the repair and restoration of a listed building and its environment. I wish the applicants very good luck, and I shall be voting in favour.
Thank you, Chair. I shall be supporting the officer's recommendation. I think this is the last chance to rescue Spout House. It's a very ambitious project. Over the last few decades, we have lost many old farm buildings across the Sheffield area. So I think this application is the development is sympathetic to the building, and the modifications and the new building proposed, I think, are sympathetic to the surroundings. Clearly, it's not an easy site, both in terms of the loss of trees and then the replacement of the trees and the landscape, and then the whole drainage issues. I'm sure when Spout House was built at the end of the 17th century, they didn't agonise over the drainage issues as much as they should have done. But I mean, we quite rightly are spending our time talking about both the drainage issues, but also the wildlife that has encroached on the site and wouldn't have been there when it was a working farm. So I think we need to see it in that sense. But I wish the developers well, and I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation.
Anybody else? Can I, from the chair, for my support as well to the officer's recommendation? I think it's clear to me that building hasn't got much life left in it. If it's left much longer, it'll fall down, because I don't think I've ever seen a building in such a bad state that all the internals are burnt out, the roof had gone, some of the walls are sloping, and the outside was so badly overgrown, God knows how I'm going to get to it. So I just think we've got to compliment the people who are attempting to save that building and make it into a nice development. I mean, I didn't know it existed. It's so well sheltered inside that wood you couldn't see it from the road. So I just think we ought to congratulate the people who's taken that job on board. So I'm going to vote for it. Anyway, anybody else? Okay, sorry, Peter.
Thank you. Like yourself, Chair, I myself didn't know it existed, and I live not 200 yards from there for over a decade. So, yeah, very well hidden. But it is. I applaud the people taking this on. I think it's brilliant, and I think, despite the fact that I have reservations about the highways problems and about the drainage and about the wildlife, at least we've heard some reassurance from officers here today. And for that reason, I will be voting for this.
Anybody else? Okay, we have two things to vote on. One, of course, is the building listing consent as well. Let's take the first vote first in favour of the planning application. I'll go around just in favour or not. Peter?
Yes, I'm in favour.
Brian?
I'd like to abstain on this one.
No, I can't support this.
Dan?
In favour, Chair.
For, 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 Chair.
That's two against, rest in favour, okay? I think we need a separate vote on the listing consent, yeah. Same again, we need to give it the building listing consent as well. So, Peter?
For, Chair.
Yep. Brian?
Once again, I'll abstain.
Richard?
I'll abstain.
Dan?
For, Chair.
Gary?
For, Chair.
Zia?
For, Chair.
Roger? Tony?
For, Chair.
Tim? Alan?
For, Chair.
Andrew?
For, Chair.
And Chris?
For, Chair.
So it's got listed building consent as well. Thank you very much, everybody. Right, next item on the agenda is 7B, which is the application, sorry, 7C, which is the 51 Carrington Road. Let me find it, page 61. This is a change of use from a dwelling class C3 to a 4-bedroom house in multiple occupation, which is C4. Who's going to introduce this? Oh, Chris. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, if I could just draw members' attention to the Supplementary Report, item 3 on there. We have had an additional representation. Olivia Blake MP has submitted a further representation on behalf of 2 constituents that raise the comments that are listed there. So this has been submitted post publishing of the committee report, Chair. So there was disappointment at the recommendation and feeling that the comments around privacy, parking, highway safety and loss of neighbourhood amenity haven't been addressed. They stated it was unclear whether a committee site visit had been made as requested, and that was needed to appreciate the parking issues and impact on amenity and should take place to appreciate that in the evening. The report acknowledges the parking difficulties and the need for 2 to 3 off-street spaces, but the recommendation, in their view, contradicts that and fails to comply with policies H5 and H14. And then the final comment is that the area around Endcliffe Park is facing unreasonable parking demand and traffic pressure. It's already saturated, and additional pressure from a HMO will have severe consequences for highway safety and congestion. All those issues have already been addressed in the main agenda report, Chair. So just to briefly sort of introduce this item, if you could just move on to the next slide, please. You'll see from the slide that the site is in a densely populated residential area. on the edge of a group of terrace streets with then some semi-detached properties to the west. The application is to change the use of what is currently a family house, a Class C3 dwelling, into a Class C4 HMO with 4 bedrooms. If you can just move to the next, I think the second or third slide, the next one down, and the next couple after that, in fact, show an image of the building which is to be converted. So that's the side gable which faces Carrington Road. The front bay faces Louth Road. The next one, I believe, shows the front of the property, and then the subsequent one, the subsequent slide, shows the rear of the property. Just looking at that particular slide, it's quite dark, but you can just about make out a garage in the foreground, and then above that, where you can just about make out a bike is parked, is a carport that exists currently. The proposal is to retain the garage, but to remove the carport to provide external amenity space for the residents, which is otherwise in short supply within the plot. It's worth noting that neither the carport nor the garage are particularly functional as parking spaces for anything. The garage being retained is retained for storage purposes and could house perhaps a smart car, motorbike, scooter, or indeed bicycles, but any larger vehicle would struggle to be parked in there and to access it on a regular basis. So we haven't taken account of that in our consideration. There are some alterations proposed within the application, but they're all permitted development, so don't require planning permission. So they include things like, if you move the slides on, please, to the next. Oh, sorry. Just while we're on that particular slide, there, you'll see that's a view taken from further back along Carrington Road, and you can just see that there is an existing dormer window on the rear of the property there, and also one being built to the right-hand side. It is proposed to construct a dormer similar to the one on the right-hand side as part of this application, but it's actually permitted development, so we have no control over that. Similarly, there are new windows being inserted, one in the side gable and one in the rear elevation, that again don't require planning permission, so we can take no account of those. The next slide shows the existing layout. Just check that is existing. No, sorry, that's proposed layout, which is for a reception room and kitchen on ground floor. Lower ground floor. We are recommending a condition, Chair. You may have seen that the reception room that's on the kind of the bottom left of that image, it has no windows. So we're recommending the position of a condition that ensures that isn't a habitable room. It can be used for any other purpose, but not for a main habitable room like a bedroom or living room. The next floor up is the one on the right, which is a sitting room, 2 sitting rooms, one at the front, one at the back. And then the next slide, please, shows two bedrooms on each floor, essentially. And then the next slide down from that will show where the dormer is being constructed on the right. The one on the left is existing. But as I say, that is permitted development, so we've been unable to take any account of the impact of that, either visually or in terms of any overlooking that might result. And then the next 2 slides show the proposed changes to the external appearance. They're only proposed images rather than existing, but they give you a flavour of what's involved. So there have been 33 objections, including from councillors Masters and Mohammed and Olivia Blake MP on behalf of a constituent. For the same reasons as mentioned in the supplementary report, parking, the impact of the physical alterations, although as I say we can't control those, and that the mix of family and shared housing in the area is imbalanced, with the feeling that there are too many HMOs, and that leads to conflicting lifestyles, and that there is poor quality accommodation provided within this particular proposal. In principle, policies H5 and CS41 of the European Core Strategy, respectively, seek to avoid an over-concentration of shared housing within housing areas, and in particular within a 200-metre radius of any given address. The data that we hold for this, which is accurate up to June of this year, so only a matter of weeks old, tells us that there are currently 13% of properties within a 200-metre radius that are in shared housing. So it would have some way to go to reach the 20% limit that policy imposes as an acceptable level. So in that sense, it complies with those in principle land use policies, and we don't feel could be resisted on that basis. In terms of neighbour impacts, as mentioned, the physical alterations are all permitted development, so we're unable to consider those. And there's no evidence of any. There is often a concern that shared housing leads to different lifestyles and a noise and disturbance that goes with that. But there is no evidence to suggest that a 4-bedroom property would result in any additional noise or disturbance to a neighbour or to a community than any other family dwelling. You know, both can be equally noisy and disturbing for their own individual reasons. So it would be unreasonable for us to have concluded that there is inevitably going to be a noise disturbance. In terms of the living conditions for future residents, there is a reasonable level of accommodation. All the bedrooms are good sized. There are 2 communal living spaces and an additional kitchen on top of that, and some external amenity spaces being created by the removal of the carport. We are recommending a maximum of 4 bedrooms and a limit on that for both quality of accommodation reasons and potential to impact on parking requirements or exacerbate any parking concerns. And as I said, we're also ensuring by condition that sort of dark blank room isn't used as living accommodation. There is no off-street parking to speak of, and neither is there any existing. So we currently have a reasonable sized family dwelling with no car parking, and we'll have a shared house with 4 bedrooms with no car parking provided off street. In terms of our guidelines, the requirements for both are the same. So we don't feel that it would be reasonable to expect a 4-bedroom shared property to necessarily generate any additional significant traffic, if any additional traffic over and above what might be created by a dwelling of that size. And as I say, the guidelines are the same. The streets are heavily parked, that we acknowledge that. And anecdotally, people talk about having to park several streets away on occasion. The photographs didn't necessarily demonstrate that, but that was taken around 11:30 one midweek morning when it's likely to be quieter. And but that is the nature of densely developed terrace housing. It's a very sustainable location, and in those terms, in terms of location and access to various facilities and alternative modes of transport, it's an ideal location for this use. So in summary, Chair, we don't feel there's a basis to resist the proposal, hence the recommendation.
Thank you, Chris. We have got 4 speakers against. Can we invite Alison Wrighting, please? Alison Wright.
Hi.
Alison.
Hi.
Welcome to the planning. I'm sorry it's in this awkward situation. The pandemic rules lay down that we've got to be quite well apart. Okay, you've got 5 minutes to make your opposition to the current planning.
Fantastic,
Over to you,
thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon. I wish to speak in objection to the planning application at 51 Carrington Road. And the concerns that I present here today are consensus of opinions collected from the community. And in particular, these concerns revolve around two main issues. The first is that we believe the creation of a 4-bed HMO would have an unacceptable impact on highway safety and loss of neighbourhood amenity. And this is not just a problem for the immediate vicinity of the property, but also for the wider neighbourhood. And this sentiment is clearly echoed by the community as the proposal received objections from 33 residents, 2 councillors and a statement from our MP. Parking in the area is already highly saturated. And importantly, this problem is uniquely exacerbated by the proximity of Endcliffe Park, because this park is extremely popular with people across the whole of Sheffield who travel by car and park on neighbouring residential streets, including Carrington and Louth Road. And together this creates a unique hotbed of congestion and highway safety issues. And so introducing a 4-bed HMO would place an unreasonable levels of pressure on an already highly saturated residential area. Furthermore, the unitary development plan policies clearly state that HMOs must provide appropriate off-street parking. And the planning report acknowledges that the application does not provide any provision for off-street parking. And so granting HMO approval appears to contradict planning policies and sets a worrying precedent. We therefore ask the committee to scrutinise the decision to grant HMO status and ensure the planning policies have been appropriately implemented. Our second point relates to the plans for a rear dormer window. We would first like to reinforce that this is not a typical rear dormer window. It's exceptionally large, it spans the entire width of the roof to the extent that it will be flashed onto the adjoining neighbour's roof. And it incorporates a set of full-height French windows, double French windows. And importantly, it will be highly visible from the public highway, as this is an end-of-terrace property at the top of a steep slope at a junction. There is no equivalent structure in terms of size, design, and visibility in the locality that we can see. The planning officer has concluded that the dormer structure constitutes permitted development. However, this decision is at odds with past planning decisions in Sheffield, revealing a concerning degree of inconsistency within the planning decision-making process. For instance, in 2021 so far, 4 rear dormers have been rejected by planners in Sheffield. In March, a rear dormer was rejected on the grounds that, and I quote, "It was overly large in scale, extending across the full width of the original roof. Likewise, it is to be placed on a prominent position that would be fully visible to Ash Street. As a result, it would detract from the original dwelling and the general appearance of the street and locality, and is not considered acceptable." Another rear dormer at a different property was rejected in May this year, and as I quote, "because it was significantly prominent given that the site is a corner plot and it adjoins a main road to the rear, and its significant size would be significantly visually intrusive to the area given the rear elevation is visible from Grimsthorpe Road." These are just a few of the examples that I found when searching the planning portal, and I have the full details and application reference numbers of those examples that I found if the committee would like further details. Additionally, French doors on dormers have also been a cause for concern for previous planning officers. For example, one officer's report from 2019 stated, "Officer concern was raised in respect of the original plans, which proposed 2 full-length openable French-style windows to the dormer. The amended plans proposed this window being replaced with a standard-size window." As you can see, the justifications given by planners for rejecting rear dormers in the past are almost word for word the concerns that we and other neighbours have raised regarding the rear dormer at 51 Carrington Road. Importantly, 2 simple modifications to the proposed design would alleviate these concerns. First, reducing the width of the dormer so it doesn't span the entire roof width. Second, replacing the fully openable French doors with standard windows, as is commonplace with the vast majority of dormer structures. We ask the committee to consider imposing these modifications and ensure that planning rules are applied consistently. Thank you for listening to our concerns, and in summary, we ask the committee to scrutinise and reject the decision to grant HMO status to ensure that planning policies are appropriately implemented. We also ask the committee to ensure that planning rules are applied consistently to rear dormers and consider modifications to the design to alleviate neighbourhood concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
Can we bring in Jonathan Watkins now, please? Jonathan Watkins. Well, welcome to planning. I'm here. Sorry about the current situation. We're going to, because of the rules, pandemic rules, I'm going to split you all up now. Okay, well, you've got 5 minutes to make your objections to us, please. Over to you.
Good afternoon. I am speaking as a neighbour to raise my objections and concerns in relation to the proposed change of use at 51 Carrington Road from a family home into a HMO. UDP policy H5C specifically states that planning permission will be granted for the creation of flats, bed-sitters and multiple sharing of houses only if there would be appropriate off-street parking for the needs of the people living there. By the definition stated in this policy, I believe this proposed development falls into the bed-sitters category as it comprises of rooms where the occupants do not have exclusive use of the bath or inside toilet. The planning officer has confirmed that in fact no appropriate off-street car parking will be provided, as he considers it highly unlikely that the one garage will actually be used due to its small size constraints. I therefore question why UDP policy H5C has been mentioned within this report, but it has not been addressed, as it would appear that this proposed development contradicts this policy. Anyone who has visited or is aware of the area surrounding this property will know just how horrendous the parking situation and highway safety is here, with the issues being severely compounded due to the close proximity to Encliffe Park. There have been several road traffic collisions on this prominent corner where number 51 is located, with the most recent incident being last Tuesday, the 29th of July at 11 p.m, whereby a motorcycle struck a car parked precariously in front of number 51, which resulted in police attendance. Countless drivers just end up abandoning their cars on the corners on the double yellow lines, as these parking restrictions are very rarely enforced during daytime hours, and on an evening when the parking situation is at its worst, it is never enforced. As people use this road as a rat run to quickly cut through down from Ecclesall Road to Rustlings Road, it is only going to be a matter of time before a serious collision occurs here due to the congestion of parked cars and often illegally parked cars. This is particularly concerning to both myself and many of the other neighbouring objectors, as we have small children that walk these streets to reach the local primary school that's only 2 minutes away. As the parking situation in this area is well beyond capacity, including the surrounding streets of Louth Road, Peveril Road, Ramby Road and Onslow Road, it seems complete madness to me to support the addition of another HMO in this area that has the potential to bring with it a further, say, 4 to 6 cars, plus cars of any guests and cars of any visitors. I ask, where are all these additional cars supposed to park? The addition of another HMO in this area won't just cause further strain on the infrastructure immediately surrounding this development, it will certainly have a ripple effect on the surrounding area, spreading the parking issues even farther and even wider. You can see from the volume of car ownership in this area that people use and need their own transport, as there is only a local bus service that takes you into the city. So I disagree with the officer's comment saying that this area is extremely sustainably located, as the evidence of car ownership levels and needs overwhelmingly proves otherwise. I question why MPPF paragraph 105, requiring local car ownership levels to be considered, is not being taken into account here. So in summary, I question why both UDP policy H5C and MPPF paragraph 105 have not been addressed, and I also question why we need to lose yet another much needed family home for yet another student HMO when there are all these brand new purpose-built student accommodation blocks being built across the city. I know that the 33 neighbour, councillor and local MP representations, all in objection, all share my concerns of this proposed development. As a final note, I've also brought with me some photos to show us examples of the parking situation, but I appreciate with the current situation as we are, I perhaps can't pass them round, but they are here to view if needs be. These do even show a Sheffield City Council vehicle having to park illegally across from number 51 Carrington Road due to the extremely high volume of cars and lack of on-street parking. Again, please imagine and consider how much worse these issues are going to be with the addition of another HMO in this location. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bring your dang car in, please. Slight delay. Dan Carr? Hello. Welcome to the Planning Committee. I'm over here.
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you.
Sorry about the configuration, but it's because of the new pandemic rules having to push people around. Anyway, you've got 5 minutes to give us your objections, please.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm speaking today to state my objection to the planning applications submitted for 51 Carrington Road. I agree totally with the points raised by other speakers, but due to time constraints, obviously I'll just concentrate on the proposed dormer extension at the rear of the house. To give some context to my objection, the location of the property is key. Number 51 is a very prominent position, an end terrace property at the top of Carrington Road on the junction of Louth Road. The top section of Carrington Road, between Peveril and Louth Roads, is very steep. If there was a road sign, it would show a 1 in 7. Consequently, the rear elevation of the property is visible the full length of Carrington Road, all the way down to the junction with Ecclesall Road, approximately 200 metres away. I live on Peveril Road, immediately behind number 51 Carrington. Because of the steep slope on this section, the ground floor of number 51 is actually higher than the first floor of our house. From our kitchen window and the garden, we are already looking at a row of imposing 4-storey buildings. Our neighbours have a similar view. At the moment, the property has a small dormer window. Nearly all the properties in the vicinity of 51 retain their original roof profile and have small dormer or Velux-type windows to give light to the attic rooms. My concern is that the proposed dormer extension will be large and overbearing, taking up the full width of the roof area according to plans and rising vertically above the first floor of the building. Furthermore, it will appear to have a much higher roof line when viewed from ours and neighbouring houses and gardens on Peveril Road. And this means, in effect, it actually adds another story to the already imposing building. The application also shows the dormer extension having full height French windows with panels of glass at either side, may possibly be double dormers. These take up half the width of the extension, and it has a balustrade that is even wider. None of the neighbouring properties have a feature such as this. For these reasons, I would say that the new extension is not in scale or character with neighbouring buildings, and therefore contravenes UDP policy H14. Also, it is neither attractive or sympathetic to the local character, so it does not comply with National Policy Planning Framework, paragraph 127, which requires developments to add to the area's overall quality, be visually attractive and be sympathetic to local character. UDP H14 also requires that residents should not be deprived of their privacy. The proposed extension, by the inclusion of full-height French windows and balcony, will directly overlook the neighbouring houses and gardens on Louth and Peveril Roads. Added to this is the further concern of the request for a change in use from C3 to C4 category in the planning application. There's a likelihood that this room will get more use in multi-occupancy than it would in a bedroom in a family home. It is very likely that the occupant of the room will want to open the doors and take in the view. And the proposed inclusion of balustrading made of obscure glass is insufficient to protect the privacy of the houses that are overlooked by this balcony. Therefore, this fails to comply with UDP H14. I'd like to ask the committee to consider modifications to the dormer to alleviate neighbourhood concerns. Thank you very much for considering my objection.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Last speaker is Councillor Barbara Masters, if you think him. Councillor Masters, welcome to the planning meeting.
Thank you.
Sorry about the situation, you're sticking in the corner, but I'm sure you understand. You've got 5 minutes to address us all, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. 51 Carrington Road is in an area previously dominated by student housing, much of which has over the years reverted back to family homes. The area is covered by Article 4 direction so that a family-based residential community can be maintained here where there is a huge demand for family housing. It is also a recognition of the fact that the community was imbalanced by a concentration of HMO type use. The area has benefited from having a settled community, which will change if this property is allowed to become an HMO. It will set a precedent. The report makes clear that on paper at least, no more than 20% of the properties lying within 200 metres of this application site. This is an encouragement for the developers to push for increasing the density of HMOs in the area to the maximum limit allowed by the policy. It puts at risk the character of the area. The property itself is a modest end terrace, not a villa of generous proportions. The officer's report states that 3 of the 4 proposed bedrooms are of a good area, while the 4th is only adequate because of the presence of 3 reception rooms. Were the rooms to be more generously proportioned, then it would be a realistic to expect it to attract tenants who intend to rent for the long term and become part of the community. As it is, an HMO of this size is more likely to appeal to a transient population, such as students, who only intend to stay for a short duration and keep within their own bubble. They are more prepared to tolerate conditions which are acceptable for a limited time, but not for the long term. The onus will be on the management of the property to ensure neighbourliness is maintained. The officer report accepts that traffic is already an issue in this area, but does not accept an HMO at this location will exacerbate the situation. This assumes that a family of 4 living at this property is just as likely to need parking for 4 cars as 4 individuals, each wanting their own personal transport. This is not a fair comparison, especially when the potential to create off-road parking at the property is not being explored. Very few properties in the area have the potential for off-street parking. This is one of them, but no conditions are being set for it to be reinstated. If this is made a condition, then it would impact on the outdoor space available to residents. The officer report makes clear there is currently no adequate private external amenity area for potential or previous occupants. The scheme therefore includes a proposal to carry out alterations to the carport area closest to the dwelling to provide an external open space facility. It seems that either occupants have an amenity area or one off-road parking space to ease the traffic problems that already exist. I trust these concerns, added to the others you have heard today, will prompt you to reject the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll deal with the parking and highway safety issues last, I think, and then Mark might want to add further to what I would say. So, not necessarily taking these in order. The one I wanted to really kind of respond to first of all was the concerns around the impact of the dormer window. The dormer window isn't being considered today. We're not taking any account of that in our decision. We haven't taken account of it in our recommendation, and it wouldn't be right for members to take account of that either. It's not part of the description of the application. It happens to be shown on the drawings for completeness, I think, as much as anything else from the applicant's perspective, but it doesn't need planning permission. So, for us to seek alterations to it or to seek to resist the application on the basis of the dormer windows would lead us open to legal challenge, because there's no requirement for permission for the dormer. I can only begin to kind of, without going through all the details of each case that the First Lady referred to in terms of inconsistency and where we have refused dormer windows, I can only assume that they were of a design, of a position and using materials that required permission. The way that that's because the way that the government has legislated for permitted development in terms of dormer windows is such that if they meet particular criteria, they don't need planning permission. This one does meet those criteria. So, for instance, they have to be set back only 200 millimetres from the eaves. They have to use matching materials. If they do all that, then they're generally permitted development. So the examples that have been raised by the first speaker will have required planning permission for some reason. They will have either not met one of those criteria, or they'll have formed part of a larger extension of the property. So I just wanted to kind of make clear, it was originally in the description, and it's been removed from the description because it doesn't need planning permission. And the same would apply to any other of the physical alterations to the building that are described in my original presentation. Taking then the question, I'll deal with the policy aspect first. I think 2 speakers referred to the requirement in policy H5 for for a house in multiple occupation to be permitted, it must have a certain level of off-street car parking. It does say that within the policy, but that policy was drafted in 1998. It's part of a wider policy, certain aspects of which are still relevant, but it was drafted in 1998, and its weight is reduced when it doesn't comply with what it says in more recent policy, including the National Planning Policy Framework. And that says at paragraph 109 that authorities should only resist, you'll have heard this before, should only resist development proposals on highway safety grounds if the impact is severe. So we've asked ourselves the question in assessing this whether the impact of any additional parking, and we're not convinced there would be any, would be severe. So that's why we've not pursued that aspect of policy H5C, I think it was correctly referred to as. And similarly, in that vein, the second speaker asked why paragraph 105 of the PPF wasn't being considered. That paragraph really is about setting parking standards within policies rather than in decision making. But in general, it comes back to that same point. We have to consider whether the absence of parking would cause a severe problem in this particular case. And I think then two more points raised by Councillor Masters. I think it was almost a question as to why we hadn't sought any off-street car parking. We could have possibly considered seeking removal of the garage, but first of all, it provides valuable storage facility for the residents, and also if that is an accessible space, or any accessible off-street space along Carrington Road, effectively renders redundant the street for parking, so it has a pretty neutral effect. So there's no real point in pursuing that, we feel, from our point of view. And then I think there was a comment made by Councillor Masters about the 20% limit and that this permission potentially, if granted, setting a precedent and encouraging further changes of use up to the 20% limit. I mean, that is we'd have to deal with each application subsequently as it came forward, but where the percentage, the concentration of HMOs is, or any other form of shared housing, is less than 20%, then that is in principle support for the proposal, subject to assessing it in further detail. I think that deals with all the points, Chair.
Okay, members' questions. Gary.
Thanks, Chair. I do apologise, Chris, but one of my questions is on the dormer window. I understand we can't say anything about it, we can't do anything about it, but I just wonder if you can advise the builder, the owner, that the glass balcony, a metre high, is going to be very prominent from the people opposite. You know, and can we put an advisory note on to them? I know you're going to say no, but I just wonder if we can find some way of saying to them, can we have it all blocked off instead of glass? But I'll let you come back on that one. And it's the dark room, you said, and when you wrote it up on there, and they're not going to use it because they can't be used as a bedroom or a sitting room, well, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to get used. So is it on an outside wall? Can't they put a window in there? Thanks, Chair.
Chris?
Chair, I'll answer the last question first, being that there's this, because I think the slide that's currently displayed there demonstrates the point, because the external walls of that part of the property are underground, effectively. So you could possibly squeeze a tiny little sort of porthole window in one elevation, perhaps that one fronting Carrington Road. But to be honest, Chair, we don't want to encourage its use for anything such as a bedroom that would intensify any of the concerns that people have already raised. In terms of the dormer window, in theory, we could add some kind of directive, but all it would be is an advice note that the applicant, if they so wanted, could, quite frankly, ignore, and we wouldn't have any control over that.
I mean, I'd rather have that on than not have it on. You know, if you can say that. I know it's not, there's no weight. Go on.
It's not within our purview, really. Anyway, see what comes after we've all spoke. Chris Lodge and Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. Is there anything in the legislation to require disabled access or disabled facilities within HMOs? Because I've read through this and can't see anything relevant in it that would require it, that may put a better development in rather than what seems to be here at the moment.
Chair, new developments should clearly, where possible, cater for a disabled end user. I think that the issue with this is is the scale of it. It's a small facility with only 4 occupants likely, and it's an existing building which is being converted that doesn't lend itself very easily to much adaptation. There's a pretty level access, for example, off Louth Road. So with any new property, a new development, then yes, there would be a more stringent requirement. For something of this nature and this scale, it's not something we would have pursued.
Okay. Comments? Roger.
Thank you, Chair. If we look at the photograph of the frontage, it's extremely narrow, isn't it? So what we get with that photograph there, or that picture, is the side view, which extends well beyond the backs of the houses that are parallel, that are on the same road. Is there any space for recreational purposes at the back of that house?
Yes, Chair. Well, at the moment, extremely little, but with this proposal, that increases to effectively the extent of the carports, because the carport is being removed. The carport's been removed to provide bin storage and to provide external sitting area for residents.
What sort of size would that be?
It's the size of a carport, so maybe 5 to 6 metres by perhaps 2.5 metres. As I say, Chair, the house at the moment, as a dwelling, has less than that. This is being provided almost as a benefit.
Chris Rodden,
Such housing will be allowed where a concentration would not cause serious nuisance to the existing residents. How can we guarantee that that wouldn't?
Chair, that part of that policy is, I'm not saying it's been replaced by, but it's been sort of duplicated by the subsequent iteration in CS41, where we talk about where we define the concentration level as being 20%. The previous version in the UDP policy, just referred to concentration and left that open to interpretation. So our approach with these applications in such circumstances is to see what the level of concentration is, and at this stage, in this particular case, it's 13%. So it's quite comfortably below the 20% where we would be concerned about that concentration and consider it to be too high. And then, as I had said, I think in my opening comments, we don't feel that we could demonstrate reasonably that 4 individuals living in that property would cause any more nuisance than a largish family, or indeed a smaller number of residents. So it's essentially about the concentration of that kind of use within an area rather than directed to one specific property and its own impacts.
Okay. Go on then.
Is one kitchen and 2 bathrooms, well, it's one large bathroom, one right at the top and a shower, would that be adequate for 4 different groups of people?
Chair, that issue is straying into housing legislation and housing licence, HMO licensing. But from a planning point of view, yes, the facilities that overall that are provided within the building are we think fine, but that's why we've imposed a condition around the use of the 2 reception rooms on the ground floor remaining so.
Seems we're back to questions. But Peter Garbutt.
Thank you, Chair. You say that there's about 13% of the dwellings within 200 metres are HMOs, but in your report you say that's the ones that have registered as HMOs and there could easily be quite a few more. Has any work been done to establish whether there are in fact any more, and if it has, what was the result of that?
Chair, there hasn't been any specific assessment, walking the streets, if you like, and analysing the individual properties within the 200-metre radius. The information is regularly updated. We accept that there may be a small number that aren't caught by that, but to try and give you an idea of what it would need to reach the 20% level, you'd need about another, I think it was 45 properties within the area to be unregistered HMOs to trigger that and to take it over the 20%. So when it is that low and when there's that much required to be unrecorded, if you like, we wouldn't forensically examine the area, whereas we might if it was at say 19%, 19.5% or something.
Thank you, Chair. I find that very helpful.
Peter.
I'm also quite concerned about this small underground, maybe not be small, maybe large, underground windowless room, and what capacity the council has for enforcement on that, if any, both yourselves as a department and other council departments. The second aspect of it is that you mentioned about the garage being used by the occupants, and I just wondered whether you knew whether the occupants did have access to that garage, or maybe the owner had access to it and use it.
Chair, the application proposes that the use for the garage is by the occupants, so that's how we've assessed that. And in terms of the space within the basement, clearly it's not something we can see from the street, but we're happy that the condition is enforceable, and in fact it's a similar condition that we have enforced on 1 or 2 other properties within the city where we've limited the use of the space and then later found it to be used as a bedroom and taken enforcement action, because clearly it's something that is enforceable. Yes, it is, because when you go to the property and you inspect it, you can see it's in use as a bedroom or as another purpose that we're seeking to avoid. So we do think it's enforceable, accepting that it is something we'd have to be made aware of, probably in the first instance.
Okay, comments? Chris Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to admit, I've never liked houses being turned into HMOs, and it always irritates me that we're losing a nice piece of family housing. I've read the report. I've really tried to find something that could say we could reject this. I'm going to have to vote for it. I absolutely hate it, but I'm going to have to vote for it because I cannot find any reason not to. And that really upsets me because I think it's a loss of a really good family house in a nice area. And I think an HMO in there is just the wrong place, but there's nothing I can find within the report to object to it, so I'm going to have to support it, Chair.
Councillor Davison.
Thank you, Chair. One of the problems we've got in Sheffield is a shortage of four-bedroomed houses, family houses, that is. One of the things that we all thought was a great idea was to have these new builds in the centre of town, because particularly for students, because that would take the pressure off family houses and indeed release many of them for what they were intended for, and that is family housing. And it really worries me that we are changing something which could be a very nice family house. At the moment, I think, I'm not objecting to the design so much, although I think there should be more recreational area. But to change the conditions, I'm going to have to vote against.
Thank you, Chair. A bit like Councillor Rosling-Joseph, I'm finding it quite difficult to find any reason to oppose this, despite the fact that every bone in my body wants to. I love the idea of a seating area with bin storage. Lovely. And I'm really worried about the parking because I've driven around that area many times trying to find a parking place. So it's not just other people telling me that happens. I know it happens. But like Councillor Rosling-Joseph, I really can't see any possible way to object to this. I'm really, really worried about the permitted development rules here, and I wonder if there was some way we could put across our concerns on this to the relevant departments.
Let's take one thing at a time. Anybody else got a comment? Okay, can you see? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of points or comments. Firstly, I am concerned, I know it's not necessarily for this meeting, that the 20% proportionality is far too high when we're looking for family homes and family communities, especially as the academic institutes building vast amounts of student accommodation. So I think that guideline needs looking at. And also, I live in an area with a reasonable level of HMOs, and what I've noticed, not this one by the way, what I've noticed over the last 12 months is that more and more occupants are now bringing cars back. 18 months ago, where I lived, car parking was not an issue. Now it is more and more so. So again, I think the quote here, given that the parking guidelines for a 3-bedroom dwelling and a 4 to 8 person shared house are the same, I find that difficult to believe. I know they're the guidelines, but I struggle to accept that. Thank you.
Okay. Can I remind people who are going to vote against, we need a reason for turning this down, a planning reason, so just bear that in mind if you're going to vote against. So I'll move around in order, and the officer's recommendation is to accept. Peter?
I think on balance I'm going to have to abstain here.
Abstain, okay. Brian?
It's going to sound familiar, but I'm going to abstain on this one.
Richard?
No, I have to vote for it with the officers.
Are you voting for it?
Yeah.
Okay. Joanne?
I'm voting for it, Chair, but I wouldn't like to forget Gary's and Peter's suggestion of a...
Yeah, okay, come back to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Gary?
Yes, Chair, for.
Oh. Let's go across. Roger? Oh, sorry.
I'll be abstaining against this one.
Abstaining,
Chair.
okay.
Yeah.
Roger?
I'm voting against it because of the change of conditions from C3 to C, from to an HMO from a family house.
Tony?
Yeah, I'll vote for reluctantly, taking into account what people have said. Thank you.
Tim?
I'm voting against in the same region as Councillor Davison.
Close. Alan?
I'm abstaining.
Andrew?
I'm voting reluctantly for the officer's recommendation.
And Chris?
Reluctantly for the officer's recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. And mine's also for reluctantly. What's the figures, I think? I think it's passed, but...
Okay, Chair, we've got 7 for, 4 abstentions and 2 against.
Again, okay, so that is carried. Can we add the reservation that members have about this window, that we put a gentle request in there?
Chair, I might need to be advised by Portia at this stage, but I think, as I said in the discussion, we can add a directive that advises or identifies a concern with the potential overlooking, but provided it's just important to reiterate to members that provided that the applicant constructs it in a manner that is permitted development, there'd be nothing that we could do to undo that work or require that work to be undone.
Just express our concern that the visual impact this is going to have, and that we'd prefer them to have another look at it, if that's okay.
As I say, we could find a way to do that, to communicate that to them.
People happy with that? Okay. Look, it's 4:10. Does anybody mind if we have a 5-minute comfort break? Because I'm getting on a bit and I require a relief. 5 minutes.
To impact on number 35 Botanical Gardens. That address is incorrect and it should be number 35 Botanical Road. Just a minor point, Chair. So in terms of, if we can move the slides along, please. Thank you. So, yes, the existing building that's been demolished is 2 former semi-detached villas. If you can just drop the slides down a couple, please. I think, and again, oh, sorry, that'll do for now, thank you. So the 2 former semi-detached villas, which are now in the form of 12 small flats, mostly 1-bedroom or studio bedsit kind of flats, to my knowledge. So the red line obviously indicates the area of the site. Brockerbank runs to the west in a north to south direction, and you can just make out the Botanical Gardens to the north of there. It's a housing area in the UDP, and it's also identified as an area of special character, as many areas were in 1998 when the UDP was established. They were areas which were not conservation areas at the time, but had the potential to become conservation areas in the future, and some did make that change. So I can think off the top of Birkendale, John Street was one, an extension to Broomhill was another, around what people refer to as the Moor Oaks Triangle. So there were some which were added to the list of conservation areas, upgraded if you like, but this wasn't one of them. And that policy is quite old, although it does still exist. It is still present within the UDP and has some limited weight as a result. So the proposal is to, if you wouldn't mind just dropping down, I'll just show the site. So that's the existing building. As you can see, it's a pair of former semi-detached villas that have been altered slightly to facilitate the conversion. The next slide down shows the rear of the property, and you can make out there a couple of cars parked in what is a small area on the end of a private lane that leads off Botanical Road, where you can park sort of 3 to 4 vehicles in not a very orderly fashion. There's no laid out parking bays or anything like that, but that is the vehicle access to the site at the moment. So the back side of the property is fairly unattractive. These external staircases, various bits of extension and what have you. The next slide down shows in one image there the two most immediately neighbouring properties. Number 35 Botanical Road, which I referred to at the beginning, is the one to the right where you can just see the grey window, and then the property with the rendered extension is. Sorry, if you wouldn't mind moving the slides back up 2 or 3 to the aerial view. You can just about make out there on the top side of the diagonal red line is where that image is. So you can see that there's a stagger there between the application site and this one and that particular property. So sorry, moving the slides back down. The next slide down is a better image of number 35 Botanical Road, which faces this site, albeit at a bit of an offset. And then the next slide down is a slightly better image of that rear yard, where there are sort of yard come end of the access track, where there are vehicles somewhat randomly parked. The next slide down shows the replacement building. Which also incorporates, you'll see there, a vehicle access off of Brocco Bank. So the replacement, the proposal is therefore to demolish the building that you saw on the previous image, and replace it with this building, which would have 2 two-bedroomed units and 6 three-bedroom units. It has 8 off-street car parking spaces within a basement car park, which is accessed through, you can see there, access through that new vehicular access point with the walls splayed to provide visibility. The lawn there is accessible for use by residents as external amenity space if they so desired, and obviously the Botanical Gardens is close by too. This is the next slide down is the rear elevation, which is slightly closer to the access road than previously. So what you're seeing there in the foreground is an area of external amenity space, small area of external amenity space for the residents. And the position of the current access road. You'll also see some splayed windows there, and so the windows will only have clear glass in those end splays that face away from or diagonally away from the rear garden of number 35 Botanical Road, which was an important change for us. We were concerned about the overlooking of that, of so many windows. We are left with 2 small windows that still have the potential to overlook, although the garden is quite heavily vegetated on the boundary. But that we feel is the same kind of impact as what is there currently. The next slides are, you might find they're a little bit small, but you can see the footprint of the building there, and the next ones down show the floor layout, and you can see at the top of the first image, the splayed nature of the window arrangements. So they'll be obscure on the larger side, which would otherwise be capable of overlooking number 35. And then the very bottom image is the car park. So it shows the access at the very bottom, 8 parking spaces with a turntable internally to assist vehicle manoeuvring. And then beyond that, some internal storage spaces, 1 per unit, which could be for a number of things, including cycle storage. There are further floor layouts and also a very small cross-section in the top right-hand corner. And then it's quite difficult to make out here, but this is an elevation of the new property. There are in red dotted lines which show the existing building. It's not particularly clear. Sorry, I'm moving my things here and I'm forgetting that I need to ask for the other slides to be moved. Sorry, would you move it down another one, please? Yes. So, thank you. That's the image I'm referring to with the red lines. You may or may not be able to pick them out on your screen. It's quite difficult on mine. But that demonstrates, or hopefully demonstrates, that the existing building is of similar scale to what we've got proposed. The main difference is towards the rear. There's about a 2.5–3 metre further depth to the site, which I think is probably better explained on not the next slide, but the one after that. So the next one along and the one after that shows in red there the existing building. And you can see there that the grey is extension beyond the line of the existing building. So hopefully that gives you an indication, Chair, of the proposal. There are 29 objections around design and scale, highway safety, in particular the new access point, the impact on neighbours, and sustainability, with the key argument being in favour of replacement, amongst the objections in favour of retention and reuse rather than replacement of the building. In principle, housing is preferred use in the area. The density at 72 per hectare is within our prescribed range of 50 to 80. The scale, as I say, is very similar to the existing building, although slightly deeper. And it's a modern interpretation of the semi-detached villas that we saw, with good quality stone being reused in all probability where possible. The applicant's already had that investigated and feels confident that they can reuse a lot of the materials. It is in the area of special character, and the building is quite typical of that area, so therefore contributes to that area of special character. But we feel that the replacement is of sufficient quality to support and complement that character in a way that doesn't harm any future aspiration, should it still arise, to upgrade that particular area to a conservation area. I can't comment on the potential for that at the moment, Chair, because it's something that it's one on a list of very many that were listed as areas of special character previously, and there's a reason why it hasn't been upgraded in the intervening years. It is in a sustainable location. A reasonable amount of car parking is being provided, and it's being constructed in a sustainable manner, albeit involving the loss of an existing building. And there is a commitment to meet the Council's sustainability policies in terms of renewable energy, etc. And I think within the report we list a number of the sustainable features that the applicant's committed to. I can't quickly turn them up now, Chair, but I can find those as the discussion goes along if necessary. We're satisfied there's no significant neighbour impacts here over and above what exists already. You can see on that image there that the neighbour to the left is significantly staggered, and there's no direct overlooking or anything there. We feel that the proposals in terms of the rear elevation have resolved any concerns we had about the property to the north. And the accommodation itself is of a high quality, including some external spaces and obviously access to two quite sizable local parks very close by. So overall, Chair, we support the application, recommending approval.
Thank you, Chris. We have two speakers in favour. We have Carol Latham, please. Carol Latham, hiya. Welcome to the Planning and Highways Committee meeting. Sorry you're stuck in a corner, I'm afraid with these new rules we've got to follow. Anyway, you're speaking to the mic. You've got 5 minutes to support the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carol Latham. I'm the architect for the project. I'm very happy to be here presenting this development to you today after a 2.5-year design process. This includes a proactive, detailed collaboration with planning officers during its application that has positively shaped the proposals. I'd like to expand about the current building, its 12 bed-set accommodation and its context and how the design process has been influenced. There's not actually that much of the existing fabric that's not being changed, and only really the stone, its contextual setting and its physical mass is of the things that provide good quality in either fabric terms or in urban design terms. The windows, the roof slates, the roof itself, external joinery, rainwater goods have all been replaced. Outbuildings, porches, door openings, lots of the bay window joinery has been replaced, infilled or lost over time. There's some quite chunky extensions, some rather unflattering dormers and fire escapes that clutter the original. The long-term bedsit subdivision has also removed many internal features. The building isn't listed, it's not in a conservation area, and it's not seen next to or in the same vista as other heritage assets. It's not the same quality and architectural meritism of its better preserved neighbours across the road. Its group value has also been diminished, unfortunately, with the 1970s block to the south and a modern glass and render extension to the north. But through disassembly, through deconstruction rather than demolition, we can reuse the stone on site for the new walling stone for the proposed building. We can reuse and recycle 95% of the materials of the building itself through deconstruction, not demolition, not a wrecking ball, and avoid landfill altogether. We found homes for the majority of the materials on the building site within the Yorkshire and Derbyshire area. We do take our responsibilities seriously, and we acknowledge that if we are to provide a replacement building, it must be of high quality. And to that end, we think there's bigger wins to be had and huge improvements in providing good quality accommodation for long-term mixed communities, wheelchair accessibility and sustainability, if we can also provide that within the new building that respects its setting in an area of character. So verticality, hierarchy, traditional materials, stone, slate, timber, metal, a respectful scale, a contemporary interpretation of key architectural features in the area, the likes of the stone bay windows and the oriels, along with a formal street scene setting and mature planted green edges, are the main elements that we've tried to embed in our design proposals. This achieves a sympathetic response, modest and in keeping with its context. Alongside this, we have also submitted to the planning officers what we call SAP calculations and whole life cycle assessments. This includes embodied energy calculations that goes into the construction of the build, and operational energy that goes into running of the home whilst in its occupation. Our carbon emissions are understood, and we've designed them through careful consideration and specification to be as low as we possibly can for both embodied and operational energy. We're using passive house standards. It's going to be fossil fuel free with heat recovery, air source heat pumps and photovoltaics. And the timber frame has been designed for disassembly at its own end of life. And we're also reusing the existing stone on site. And we'll be using reclaimed stone for any shortfall within the existing building to the new. We can demonstrate that this will emit 1/3 of the whole life carbon emissions associated with a notional retrofit of the same area. By offsetting the remaining low amounts of embodied energy with UK woodland, this can become a net zero development. For highway safety, the majority of the design work was undertaken at pre-application stage with a highways officer, planning officers, structural engineers and an arboriculturalist to achieve good vehicle access whilst preserving all road users' safety, retaining the legibility of the Brocklebank retaining wall and protecting the root protection area of the neighbouring trees. We have 15 dwellings, 1 therapy centre and St Augustine's Church between this site and Hunters Bar roundabout that all safely use Brocklebank for vehicle access without compromise to safety or traffic flow. The minor amounts of vehicle movements generated by an older demographic out with commuter rush hours with full visibility and intervisibility displays will not compromise road use or road users. We have SUDs, we have increased parking, we have electric vehicle charging for each apartment, we have photovoltaics on a hidden flat roof, we have mature tree and hedge planting. We have increased the biodiversity by removing the tar macadam at the back of the site and replacing this with landscaping for extra amenity. These are all an enhancement to the current site. Great care has been taken with the design to coordinate a proposal that meets viability without impacting on adjacent neighbours. We've matched or stepped down the roof heights. We've aligned a marginal increase in the footprint to where we have existing mature trees and blank gables. We have designed out the overbearing effects. Currently, over 3 elevations, 11 apartments, all their windows overlook the adjacent properties or their gardens. The proposed design reduces this to 2 small secondary bedroom windows. Inverted and extruded oriels direct the full height bedroom views over 12 metres to the communal south-facing landscaping. Side windows, either secondary ones for the main rooms for summer cross-flow or to bathrooms and en-suites, are obscured. BRE guidance for checking sunlight and daylight has been followed rigorously. A 2 to 3 metre footprint increase in a single rear direction, but no significant change in building height, equates to no noticeable effect on the overshadowing, which equates to no loss of amenity for the neighbouring gardens. We are 2 small local practices, the developer and the architect, and we're uniquely placed to design and deliver something different and of merit for this area of character. We have set ourselves out to raise the bar for ourselves of a sustainable and accessible development with this viable proposal. We're trying to be forward-looking with this net zero commercial project, and we think this might be a first for Sheffield for a commercial housing development, and we hope you'll support us in achieving this.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Carol. Can we now Adam Martin will also support their proposals. Is Adam Martin? I'm here. Welcome to the Planning and Highways Committee. Apologies for the putting out on a limb. I'm afraid the new regulations demand a separation. Yes, sir. You've got 5 minutes to address the meeting and support the proposal. Over to you, sir.
Hello. Good afternoon. I'm the developer. I'm the poor chap who puts his hand in his pockets. My wife and I are the team behind this. We gave our team, a professional team, a brief to design a carbon net zero building, sympathetically a beautiful building to replace the existing building. I'll be honest with you, we could do this much more cheaply. But I'm still in this game. I'm not an old developer, I'm a younger-ish developer. I hope I've got a future in front of me. I believe that we should be building buildings for the future, not the past. I believe we can build beautiful buildings, and I would like to demonstrate that we can build a commercial building in Sheffield that is net zero carbon producing. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and in 20 years' time, when she asks me what I did to help combat climate change, I can look her in the eye and say, this is what I've done, because I would like to think this will be the first of more. My team is confident that we can build this. And the existing building I've owned for some time, it has reached the end of its useful life. The new builds in the city centre are attracting the tenants that we keep in, who live in there at the moment. They are very small, very tired apartments. I haven't increased the rent for over 10 years for various reasons. There is a lack of sinking fund to do the improvements of the property. The new build that Carol has designed produces 1/3 of the carbon of a retrofit, which is fabulous for the climate for Sheffield. And I think we can just build better as developers. We need to do this. We can't keep accepting that buildings should be built with a profit margin constantly in mind, that we should squeeze every pound out of everything. We need to start looking at the future. And we're so confident we can do this. If you pass this, I know you've heard this before from other developers, I'm sure you have. I invite you at any time, if you pass this, to come on site, and with my project manager we'll show you how we're building this. We can build this to passive house standards. It's a German standard. It's higher than our standard. It can be done, and it can be done commercially, and we just need the chance, the opportunity to give it a shot, because it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. I think that's very welcome. You need to respond, Chris? Okay. Questions, sorry. Yes, sit down.
Chris, thank you, Abby. It's not with regards to the development. I just welcome hearing what the developer said. And I wonder if there's any way that we could actually make a case study of this to see how it's achieved and, you know, to learn some lessons for the future. I don't know if that's possible, but it just seems such a positive response to a lot of the comments that we've been making as members in the past, that I would like to, you know, engage in that somewhere and do a
certainly very impressive.
Yeah.
Peter come in, because I think he might have some similar comment.
Yes, although I do have questions. So, first of all, is there anything dodgy about the fabric of the current building? Sorry? Take my mask off, yes. Right, is there anything dodgy about the fabric of the current building? That was one of them. I'm questioning how they can do this with one third of the CO2 cost of a retrofit. And I think Carol referred to the older people who they thought would be buying into these flats. How do we know that's going to be the demographic that will buy them? Those are the three questions I've got.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In terms of Councillor Hurst's question, there's nothing we could do within the terms of this application to make it a decision on this application to make it any kind of case study. But whether that's possible in the future once things up and running perhaps remains to be seen. In terms of Councillor Garbutt's questions, I think the first two were along the same lines. You know, what's the quality of the existing fabric of the building, and how can they construct it with 1/3 of the carbon cost of a retrofit. I think it's fair to say that within the consideration of the application, there's been a number of comments from if you like, both sides with the local planning authority in the middle, around the applicant quite passionately extolling the virtues of the scheme and the decision to deconstruct the building rather than retain it and to build a replacement has been the best way of achieving the right outcomes in climate change sustainability terms and a body of representation that is arguing the opposite, that it's better to retain the existing building. Our policies and the council's policies and national policies don't prescribe what's right or wrong in those circumstances. So in essence, we, to a degree, accept what the applicant's saying about their intentions. They've researched it, they've demonstrated to us that they have researched it with the level of information that they've provided. We haven't forensically examined that because we're not in a position to judge whether one is necessarily better than the other, because there are a lot of the views there's one opinion in one way and one in another, and you can read several bits of articles from different bodies that support each movement, if you like. So we've concentrated on ensuring that the application complies with our stated policies around a minimum of 10% renewable energy, for example, encouraging things like electric vehicle charging points, solar panels, there's a green roof element as well, and reducing surface water runoff from the site, which exists from what exists at the moment. So we've concentrated on ensuring that our policies are met, and then many of the applicants' ambitions would go beyond that, would go somewhere beyond that, and indeed would go somewhere beyond the requirements of the National Planning Policy Framework. So I suppose what I'm saying is we're more than happy that it meets the terms of our policies in sustainability terms, and that's as far as we can necessarily judge on this. In terms of the final point on how can we be certain that older people occupy the property, we can't. Again, the applicant's intention is to aim or to market their product at downsizers, and again, we have no policy requirement to insist upon that. So we leave that effectively to the applicant or whoever the owner of the building at the end of it would be. It sounds like the applicant themselves, to deal with those matters. But there's no requirement for us to impose, or we haven't imposed, and I wouldn't recommend doing that to ensure it's people above a certain age. I think the point was being made in response to concerns about traffic movements, etc. We're happy with the traffic movements, whatever age of person occupies the property.
Christian, sorry, is there any more questions? Observations, and Christian?
Yes, Chair. Like Diane, I found that developer quite refreshing, that he wants to push for these higher standards than we have. And when he mentioned the German standards, they are far higher than what we have over here. And for years I've been banging on about putting solar panels in and heat recovery things, and all the things that our great colleague Alf Mead used to go on about time after time. But to actually hear a developer saying it shouldn't be about squeezing every penny, it should be about sustainability and the quality of the product was very refreshing. And I, for one, welcome this development, and I wish him success. And if he can do more of these that brings that sustainability, good luck to him, Chair.
Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's one of those where you can sit in a neutral position and weigh up the arguments as it proceeds. And I was very impressed, I must admit. I'm reluctant to, normally, to see a very old building of that kind being demolished. But to recycle it, and in fact, if that adds to the carbon neutrality that we're seeking, I think it's a very good scheme, and I'm going to vote for it. Thank you.
Anybody else? No, I'd like to support it. I think it's very exciting. The ground pump idea, as well as the, as solar panels as well. I think it's a superb development, and it looks very attractive as well. I was quite impressed. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, I've had an interest in building design over many years now, and been to a lot of things that seem to be zero carbon homes, etc. So we have to take at face value this, and then bear this in mind for future, what we're being told and what the actual outcome is, because obviously one of the mantras is looking at retrofitting buildings rather than rebuild. So this is something that we can look at and see whether we can embed it in planning policies in the future, local plan in the future. So I will support this. Obviously, the presentation has been quite good, but I will take up the offer, I think, of going to have a look at this to see how it goes and see how it pans out with the actuality versus what's being promised here.
Andrew?
Yes, Chair, I'll be supporting this. I mean, I think those of us who've been pushing for passive house projects are always keen to see some happening. And I think the reason I'm supporting this is as much to do with the current state of it and the fact that it's been fiddled with. I mean, I'm a great supporter in terms of the Victorian and Edwardian heritage of this city, but when a building has been modified, I think taking it down and rebuilding it to new modern standards is the way forward. I think where we've set ourselves cross-party this 2030 target, it is hugely challenging in terms of house building and in terms of housing. But where we've got house building, it's really good to see a developer go to the challenge that we're going to demand of lots of developers. And I think the quicker we can get a city plan with revised strategies, and so we don't have to keep looking at this 10%, which really bugs myself and a number of colleagues. Something like this, which is aiming much, much higher, and this is the level we need to be at, and this is the level where many of our Northern European neighbours are already at. Denmark, Sweden, as well as Germany, Netherlands would see lots of developments at this sort of level in terms of where they're going in terms of carbon. So I hear what the developers are saying, but we have to, see where they get to in 2 or 3 years' time. But I wish them, I wish them all the best, and I will be supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. It may seem strange that a Green Party person would be not wanting to welcome this. I do welcome it, and I will be voting for it, but I think I have reservations in the sense that, having studied this sort of thing for a long time now, I'm fairly sceptical about some of the claims made. I will be taking up his offer of going along and following how it works out, and I really hope that the claims that they're making are going to be substantiated. So yes, I will be voting for it, and I welcome it.
Okay, go to the vote then. The officers recommend grant conditionally. I'll take it. Peter?
Yes, certainly, I'll go with that.
Brian's is out of the room. Richard?
Yes.
Dan?
In favour, Chair.
And Gary?
For, Chair.
Zia?
For, Chair.
Pete? Roger Davison?
For, Chair.
Tony?
In favour, thank you.
Tim?
In favour.
Alan?
In favour.
Andrew?
For the officer's recommendation.
And Chris?
In favour, Chair.
In favour. Unanimous.
For, Chair.
Good. Okay. very much. The last one, yes, the last one, is it? It's the land on Burleymore Avenue, Burley Lane, Newstead, Sheffield. Lucy's going to introduce this one to us. Be careful.
Yeah.
Oh yes, can we get Brian back? 41 dwelling houses and 3 apartment blocks on Burleymore Avenue and Burleymore Lane. Many of us went to see it by the large site. Welcome back in, Brian. You don't need that in here. On his mask button. Right, Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. There's just some supplementary information and then I'll run through the presentation. So supplementary report number 1, we've had 1 additional letter of representation. It's been received from the occupant of number 2 Newstead Way, and their comments are that they own their property and don't want to look out onto flats and houses. They love the greenery and trees and they don't want the development to affect house values by having horrible views. Chair, obviously it's always been the intention to redevelop the site for housing following the demolition of the former dwelling houses. The loss of a private view onto the green space is not a matter that can be taken into account in the determination of this application. The development of the site will result in the loss of green space and some trees, but areas of open space and new planting, including substantial tree planting, will be incorporated into the proposed scheme. Chair, as members know, loss of house value is not a planning matter, so that can't be taken into account. There are some additional drawings to be included in condition number 2, and these are largely about ensuring that the proposed sections are extended to include the existing adjacent properties. So it's not any amendments to the layout, it's just to make sure that we've got the correct section information on that condition. So there's a full list of additional and amended drawings, but that's what it covers, Chair. So in terms of this scheme, it's obviously a council scheme to provide 100% affordable housing, and it's led by a housing needs assessment. It's part of the site that members will probably previously know as the Scowardens, Weaklands and Newstead site, which is the Swan site, and was originally part of the Housing Market Renewal Programme. And this particular site had, I think the majority of the properties on it were those flat-roofed, known as the Vic Hallam houses, and they were demolished quite a long time ago, but members that went on the site visit will obviously have seen that the footpaths and the roads are still visible on the site. If we could look at the first slide for my presentation, please, which actually is probably the second slide. It's the red line boundary plan, so it's the next slide along, please. So this shows the aerial image. I'm sure a lot of members are familiar, and then we did have a good turnout on the site visit. So that just shows the site extent. The next slide shows the aerial view. So you can see the original paths and the road on there, but obviously you can see that it looks green at the moment because the demolition happened a long time ago, and the area was seeded with grass just in the interim. But it's always been expected to house new development. The next slide shows views of the site from Burleymore Avenue, which is to the north, and also from Newstead Way within the site. The next slide shows photos from Burley Lane to the south and southeast corner of the site. The next slide shows views from Newstead Avenue and from the middle of the site towards Newstead Avenue. The next slide shows several photos which look at the site from Burley Lane. So you can see the gap that we looked at on site yesterday, where there's a gap in the trees, and that's the gap that is proposed to be filled with new tree planting as part of the scheme, and we did look at that in detail. The next slide shows the layout plan with houses across the majority of the site, and the 3 blocks of flats to the southern edge of the site. The next slide shows the context of what will be a future scheme to the north, and that's going to be the specialist old persons independent living accommodation. That application is not in yet, but it is expected very shortly. So we're just giving you that context to show that it's a full redevelopment of this area to provide homes for a wide variety of people. The next slide shows site sections to illustrate the impact on existing properties and within the site. And the next slide shows further site sections, particularly illustrating the flat blocks relationship with Burley Lane, but also with the existing taller blocks on Newstead Way that we also observed yesterday. The next slide shows site sections which shows the west to east fall and the east to west fall of the site, and obviously members that went on site could see that it does have a substantial fall across that part of the site. The next slide shows the final sections illustrating the relationship to the nearest house across the road on Burley Lane, which again we observed is number 1 Burley Lane, so we took pains to observe that on our site visit. The next slide shows a kind of image, a CGI of the proposals as viewed from Burley Lane, so that shows where the trees would be planted, which would partly screen the apartment blocks. The next slide shows a typical image of the new housing, as does the next slide. So this would be internal to the estate. And then the next couple of slides show some 3D context plans, which gives you a good relationship to the existing properties and shows how this scheme would fit in. And then finally, the last couple of slides show the typical materials. That's the flat block there. And then the next one shows the houses, and it shows, this is just to help illustrate that there are some quite attractive details proposed in the brickwork on the properties. We're talking about robust materials, so it would all be in brick. I think we observed on the site yesterday that some of the newer houses have got timber and render, and they were already looking tired. So these houses and flats would be entirely brick. And they would also have aluminium windows, colour matched, to the doors and so on, so that we're going for longevity of product. I think, Chair, that's probably all I need to say for now, because I think you've got some speakers in relation to this.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. Well, this is unusual. We have two speakers, one against, I'll ask to be read out, and in this case, it's only an exception. I'm going to allow the officers to read this statement out because the individual can't be here for other reasons. So I don't want to encourage this, but in this case, I think it's important that we do hear the statement of the opposition. Are you going to read it? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a statement from Nigel Hancock. This is a statement from Nigel Hancock, who can't be with us this afternoon. My property is on the opposite side of Burley Lane to where this proposed development is planned. I have lived in the area for 55 years and went to school on the site that is now occupied by Burley Academy. I am more than familiar with the area and what it was like when the Vic Hallam type houses, which were demolished 12 years ago, were there and occupied. The removal of these buildings and the redevelopment of the area were welcomed, and together with the majority of other local residents, I have no objections in principle for the site being redeveloped for residential purposes and providing much needed affordable housing in the area. But this scheme is ill-conceived and results in a form of development that causes harm to the area and forms a poor standard of amenity for future residents, both of which are contrary to the provisions of the Council's adopted local plan and the government policy in the NPPF. Notably, as well, is that all 3 ward councillors have objected to this application. Clearly, there is something wrong if a scheme submitted by the Council results in objections from its own elected members for the area and the local community who will be directly affected by it. The local councillors did take time out to visit the site and formed their opinion after having had due regard to what was being proposed in relation to the specific topography of the area and the surrounding houses. The main concern is the siting of the proposed 3- and 4-storey apartment blocks. These have been located on the southern side of the development site on land that is significantly higher than the adjacent highway and properties on Burley Lane. This level difference accentuates the overall height of the apartment blocks when viewed from the road, surrounding footpaths, conservation area and greenbelt, such that this part of the scheme will appear overly dominant and out of character with the surrounding area and where there are no other apartment blocks. This is clearly contrary to policies H14 and BE5 of the local plan and the provisions of the MPPF. Immediately adjacent to the site on the western boundary are bungalows. Siting 3 and 4 storey apartment blocks in this location does not respect the character and form of the surrounding built development. I did raise overlooking of my property and garden in my objection and recognise that this part of the development is located 60 metres away. However, the introduction of apartments with 12 balconies and 12 habitable room windows with direct, clear and uninterrupted views onto my property will cause a loss of privacy that cannot be mitigated against and further demonstrates that the siting of the apartments is harmful to the wider amenity of the area. This is not a particularly challenging site as suggested in the officer's report. Yes, there are some level differences and existing trees on the site, but nothing unusual that would prevent a development coming forward that complies with adopted policy and guidance. The site forms part of a larger development area, and there are opportunities to redesign the proposal so that these issues can be resolved. I do find it strange that the officer report quotes para 131 of the MPPF, which states that a great weight should be given to outstanding or innovative designs which promote high-level sustainability or help raise the standard of design more generally in an area, so long as they fit in with the overall form and layout of their surroundings. I don't think that anyone would suggest that this development satisfies that requirement, and even the officer report acknowledges that the dwelling houses and apartment blocks are simply articulated. The report then recognises that the South Yorkshire Residential Design Guide seeks to provide a clear and consistent approach to design to achieve higher quality neighbourhoods and efficiency savings for developers and is considered to be best practice guidance. In my opinion, the report then downplays and potentially misleads members with regards to how far the scheme actually deviates from this guidance. The report states that the proposed development has been designed such that it will largely be in line with the standards set out in the SYRDG, and goes on to say that back-to-back distances vary from 17.9 metres to 22 metres. However, in reality, the majority of the back-to-back distances between the dwellings are less than 21 metres, with a number of properties having gardens that do not meet the minimum standard of 10 metres, as well as having outlooks less than 12 metres to a blank gable wall. The worst example is between plot 22 and 32, where there is only 15.2 metres between habitable room windows, coupled with a level difference resulting in a significant overlooking and loss of privacy between the two houses. To suggest that the government's permitted development rights, which allow a 2-storey extension to be built within 7 metres of a rear boundary, somehow justifies this is inappropriate and fails to consider that permitted development can be removed from new schemes where suitable distances between dwellings in new and often cramped layouts should be maintained. In this layout, 24 out of the 41 plots, that's 59%, are substandard in one way or another. This is a council development that should be setting an example for private developers to follow, not providing substandard privacy distances and trying to justify this simply because it is wholly compromised of affordable housing. The wider scheme is seeking to provide an old person's independent living units, and it would be much more appropriate to provide new bungalows adjacent to the existing bungalows on Stephen Mangle Close, with the apartment blocks moved to the north of the site, adjacent to Newstead Road, which is at a lower level than the surrounding houses and would not be seen from the conservation area or the green belt. This would help assimilate the development much more legibly into the existing pattern of the development and allow more space for the general needs housing to be laid out. Bungalows adjacent to Burley Lane would also sit more comfortably in this elevated position. In my opinion, this development is contrary to the MPPF, UDP policies H14, BE5 and BE16 and the guidance contained within the South Yorkshire Residential Guide, and in its current form should be refused. It causes unacceptable overlooking and a loss of privacy to number 1 Burley Lane, is out of character with the surrounding built development, causes unacceptable harm to the visual amenities of the area and fails to complement the scale, form and architectural style of surrounding buildings, which is contrary to the aforementioned policies. No heritage statement has been provided and the design fails to take into account the views into and out of the adjacent conservation area, resulting in a detrimental effect on its setting contrary to national and local planning policies. It results in a cramped and unacceptable form of development which is clearly at odds with the spacing standards as advocated by the SYRDG, and whilst the development does result in much needed housing for the city, this should not be at the expense of character and the visual appearance of the area and the amenities of the future occupiers and existing local residents. Thank you.
Thanks, Abby. You guys as long as that. There's another speaker in favour. Can we have Richard Cookson? Richard Cookson. Welcome, Richard. Nice to see you. Sorry, you're in an awkward place, but that's spacing us out like this. You've got 5 minutes to speak in favour of the proposal before us.
My name's Richard Cookson. I work for the Strategic Housing Service, and my statement today covers the evidence for affordable housing need in the area. The Newstead site sits within the Burley neighbourhood and South East housing market area. The types of properties required in this area have been established using a variety of sources. The Strategic Housing Market Assessment in 2019, also known as the Hmos, assesses the housing needs in Sheffield based on a survey of households and calculates the annual affordable housing shortfall for the city. It estimated a shortfall of 902 affordable homes per year over the next 5 years. Consultation was undertaken with residents as part of the Hmos. 2,647 households responded to the survey, of which 13% lived in the South East housing market area. This is sufficient to give a high degree of confidence in the survey results. The survey asked households about their current housing, their move-in intentions, the needs of new households, income levels, the affordability of their housing, and any specialist housing requirements. To get a more localised view, the information is broken down into 13 housing market areas, the southeast of Sheffield being one. This includes the wards of Bayton, Burley, Mosborough, Richmond and Woodhouse. A housing market area profile of each of the 13 areas was developed using the Hmos data, the census, house prices, rent levels, housing stock information and turnover of social housing to assess the local housing needs and future supply requirements. They provide a sound, evidence-based steer for planning policy on the types and tenure of housing that's most needed within these markets. The South East profile has identified a need for flats and houses with 1 or 2 bedrooms in all tenures, family houses with 3 and 4 bedrooms for sale, 1 and 2 bed flats and 2 bed houses as shared ownership, and additional affordable housing with a definite focus on the neighbourhoods where there's a high demand, such as Burley. A key factor driving the need for more affordable housing in the area is affordability. The Hmos survey found that 32% of non-home owning households in the South East had sufficient income to afford mortgage payments on a lower quartile value home in the area. 22% could afford the average 2-bed private rent. Affordable homes then are the only realistic options for many households. Demand from newly forming households is another factor. 24% of people in the South East who expected to form a new household expected to rent from the council. In terms of the Burley neighbourhood, where Newstead is located, the area has approximately 800 social rented homes. Currently, 82% of them are houses. Correspondingly, there's a low proportion of flats and fewer properties with 1 bedroom. Social housing is in high demand. All Sheffield City Council-owned homes, and the majority of those owned by registered providers, are let using the choice-based lettings process, where available properties are advertised each week for households to express an interest or bid for those that they are eligible for. The data on the number of households bidding gives a picture of the scale of need in Burley. In the 2019-20 financial year, 12 one-bed flats were let in the Burley neighbourhood and they received an average of 72 bids. 10 two-bed houses were let and received an average of 106 bids. 8 three-bed houses were let and received an average of 116 bids. No 4-bed houses were let in Burley itself. There's only 29 4-bed social homes in the neighbourhood, and turnover is low. Turnover of all social homes in the area is low. In 2019-20, just 6% of affordable homes in Burley were re-let, and the average time applicants without an urgent rehousing priority wait for a social home is 9 years and 4 months. In summary, from the information above, the evidence of housing need in the area suggests that new affordable housing should be provided in a range of types and sizes. There's a high level of need for the 1- and 2-bed flats and the 2-, 3- and 4-bed houses. The mix of property type planned for the site will help meet local needs and promote a balanced community. In terms of the location of the flats on this specific site, from a design point of view, the scale of buildings respond appropriately to the topography and surrounding context. They maximise the views and outlook for the site and create a well-connected development which, owing to the layout, will link into existing housing estates and provide a good transition to the future older persons' independent living development.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Lucy, do you want to respond to? Well, a bit. Take it. That's it. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. I don't need to respond, obviously, to the housing need arguments because they're quite clear from the second speaker, but I would like to respond to Nigel Hancock's objection. The points really are that were made are already covered in the report, but just a few highlights, I suppose. In our view, the scheme is not ill-conceived. The plots are arranged to address the street frontages, and they deal with irregular shaped boundaries, and that's partly to do with wanting to retain as many trees as possible. So there are a lot of trees surrounding the site, so it's quite difficult to accommodate the development in that sense, but it will provide a green setting to both the houses and to the flats. In our view, the flats to the south of the site form, if you like, a protective feature adjacent to that really busy road, and then there's transition to the family houses beyond that, so they kind of protect the family housing from quite a lot of the noise and activity of that road. And it's actually the lowest part of the site as well, so whilst we accept that there's quite a transition of levels between that part of the site and the properties opposite, in terms of the red line boundary site, it's the lowest part of the site. So whilst they are significant, there are other examples of taller blocks which we saw when we were on the site visit yesterday, and they exist in the newer housing to the east of the site, where there are quite a few 3-storey blocks already, and some of them have quite tall features on their roofs which make them appear almost as 4 stories, and I think that's what we witnessed yesterday, and they mark key corner points. So I don't think it's unusual. These apartment blocks are 4 and 3 stories because they step down the topography, so they're not all at 4 stories. There is a 3-story element to them. So the blocks of apartments are not immediately next to bungalows on Stephen Mangle Close. If you look at the layout, there are actually some intervening houses that are proposed between those bungalows and the apartments, so they're not adjacent to each other. The overlooking to 1 Burley Lane is addressed in the report, and at 60 metres away it's almost 3 times the recommended separation distance. And as we discussed yesterday on site, the landscaping plan clearly shows additional tree planting to bridge that gap that's currently on that road frontage. So that would further help screen the impact of the apartment blocks. Our reference to paragraph 131 of the NPPF is in relation to our belief that this development will help raise the standard of design in the local area more generally. These are good quality, simple, robust dwellings, and I think compared to the properties that have already been constructed to the east of the site, we could see that some of the timber work, some of the render wasn't looking particularly good. So actually the approach here is for a much more robust response, and the internal space standards are excellent and probably much better than you will see in private properties. The report does acknowledge that the separation distances within the site itself are not in line with guidance in a minority of cases, but we've balanced this against the excellent internal space standards of the properties, the desperate need to provide affordable housing, and the requirement to keep as many trees as possible, which allows the buildings to be in a green setting and provides more open space for residents to be able to use. And also the distances are not dissimilar to the prevailing character of the adjoining newer housing that's already been built there. And obviously, as members know, we've got a desperate need for housing, and actually we're going to have to look at greater densification in the future, and so we think it's acceptable. Just to be clear, the distances to existing properties are well beyond the guidelines of the 21 metres, so this isn't about impacting on existing residents, it's about the development itself. In terms of a heritage statement, that isn't necessary for this scheme. The Moss Valley Conservation Area is separated from the site by both the road and the golf course opposite, so Burley Golf Course. And the new development will clearly be seen from the countryside within an existing built form. So there is built form immediately behind it, so we don't feel that a heritage statement was necessary in that context. I think, Chair, that's probably all I need to say in response.
Thank you, Lucy. Questions? Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I've got three. First of all, it says there was going to be some open space. I was looking at the map when you put it up, and I could only see a little bit of open space where the big stand of trees was that separated it from the proposed old people's complex behind it. Is there any other open space provided? The second one is concerning the, obviously, climate concerns, having just heard the previous application. How will the homes here be climate conscious, shall we say? Are there any air source heat pumps? Are there any solar panels, etc.? And the third one was raised by Nigel Hancock in his statement, where he said I think the phrase used in the report is simply articulated. I picked this up when I read the report, and I felt that this meant we're not putting a lot of effort into designing it. That's how it came across to me, and I think Nigel Hancock read it in the same way. So I'd like some comments on that, please.
Chair, am I okay to... So in terms of simple articulation, actually the image that's on screen now, if you look at what we mean is a robust and crisp detail. I suppose it could have been worded better in the report, but there are also interesting features like brick features, and the windows themselves are high quality. So we're saying it's a high quality, but yes, fairly simple design. But I think because what we witnessed on site yesterday was some of the previously built properties are already suffering from some problem features. So we felt that it was a much better response. There are some, I think the 1940s or 50s semi-detached properties adjacent to this site as well, and we looked at those. And I suppose this is a modern interpretation of a design that will stand the test of time, if you like. So sometimes when we say simple, it just means not fussy, but it's quality details that will stand the test of time. So I suppose that perhaps that could have been better articulated in the report, but we think it's a good standard of design generally. In terms of climate concerns, in the sustainability section, obviously, as members are aware, there's the 10% requirement. What is proposed here is that they'll be super insulated, and it equates to 11 points. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the page which it was on.
So page 134.
Oh, sorry, thank you. I was just trying to get the exact percentage. So 11%, 11.7% above the current building regulation standards, but also they've been designed so that they can in the future incorporate solar panels if there is enough money available to be able to do that. So they are designed specifically to be able to take that load, but they do more than meet the policy requirements. In terms of the main open space, is it possible just to go back to one of the images with on the slides with the with one of the layout plans on? You'll have to go backwards. I'm not sure how many back it was. It's quite towards the beginning, I would think. If you keep going. Yeah, sorry, go forward again. So it's around, so the space, yeah, that one's fine. The space between this site and the older person's accommodation, but there's also informal open space on the western edge as well. And then again, there's where the sud space and the drainage features are to the east of the site, in that little dogleg that comes off the end, there's quite substantial informal open space. And obviously in the report we're saying that there's there will be an increase in informal open space as a result of this development. So that will be an improvement over the current situation. In terms of the nearest formal open space, there's obviously there's a large open space to the west of the Burley Academy, which is up the road. There's Freshville Park, which is less than 1 kilometre to the northwest, and then there's the Hackenthorpe Skate Park, which is about 500 metres to the west. So there's a combination nearby of informal open space and more formal open space.
Tony, Danny?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think, before I start, I think this is welcome. We've been calling, I mean, I've been on planning before, some years ago, and all the time I've been on, we've been calling for affordable houses and houses for rent. And this is a brilliant planning application. The only thing I would want to draw your attention to is on the top of page 127, where the comments from the local councillors have said they consider that topography of the site does not lend itself to the suggested 3 and 4 storey flats, which are proposed on the highest point of the site. They consider that could block light and potential views for both the existing and proposed houses, and the flats could hide the light from the road, creating a danger for pedestrians using the paths. Well, because I'm not a full member of this committee and I'm only a substitute member, I didn't get on the site visit. So I just wonder how you could address that, Lucy, please.
Chair, I mean, that was really the main purpose of the members' site visit yesterday, was specifically to look at the whole site, but particularly in relation to the apartment blocks. And I think it's obvious when you go on the site does actually fall considerably from the top northwest corner down to the south. So in terms of the site itself, the apartment blocks are on the lower part of the site. And then obviously they are elevated above the main road and the tram tracks and the properties opposite. But there's a 60-metre separation and substantial, there's already a lot of trees, but the proposal is to infill that with more trees. So I think that there's certainly a logic from our point of view having the apartments here, because if you think about the future proposal for the old people's independent living accommodation to the north, what we wanted really is a transition from the apartments that are serving perhaps the younger end of the market through to the family homes, and then up through to the old person's independent living accommodation. So I think in terms of community, ourselves and housing colleagues felt that really was probably the best approach. And also, as I said in the presentation, it isn't unusual to have 3 stories at all. The 4 stories is slightly higher, but in actual fact, when you look at some of the existing newer properties and the corner plots that were built that are immediately adjacent to this site, quite a substantial number are already 3 stories, and some have the appearance of 4 stories because they've got very tall pitched roofs, whereas these would have flat roofs. So we think it is within the context of what's achievable on this site. So actually as officers we don't have those same concerns.
Thank you.
Roger, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, the question I was going to ask Lucy she's already answered it. So I'd like to incorporate that into comments later, if I may, Chair.
Peter. Yeah, Tim? Hang on, can I read my writing? Brian.
Yeah, a question for Lucy. What's the longevity of flat roofs as opposed to pitched roofs? Do they leak more?
Chair, I think really that's something for the building regulations, but I mean, I would expect these days about 30 years, something of that order, but it depends completely on the construction, and that's not a specific planning consideration. Obviously, that's a building regulations matter.
I was just going to follow up on that one. So are flat roofs cheaper, which is they've always tended to be, in the 1960s and other periods? Is that why they're being added?
Chair, I'm not sure that's a planning consideration, to be honest.
That's not a planning consideration, but... Tim now, sorry.
You talk about, when we talk about the environmental aspect, and then it talks about the car parking. Are we actually, is part of the plans, because I can't see it, does it have that the car parking spaces will have electric charging points attached to them? Because this is, we talk about reducing car use, but that's not going to eliminate it, and we can't just say these people don't, people that are moving into here don't have them. And if it's already embedded into part of the site, then that's a great encouragement to people to move away from their petrol and diesel vehicles.
Chair, can I ask Mark to answer that one, please?
Chair, it was a colleague of mine who dealt with this planning application, but having read the report and looking at the plans, references made to EV charging points being spread across the site. I haven't got any more detail than that at this stage.
Okay, any comments?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I thought it was a very worthwhile visit yesterday. The standard of housing I was very impressed with. We did manage to speak to the architect. The question that I asked of Lucy was about the nearest park, which she did answer that question today. She said she was going to look out for it. So thank you very much for that, Lucy. But the architect also mentioned the fact that the gardens would be big enough for recreational purposes. Anyway, they were much bigger than they need to be. And I thought that was pretty good. Although of course we know that people like to congregate in teams and play. But as long as it's a walkable distance to Parkland, I think that what they have designed is far better than what existed beforehand, and that's why I'm going to vote for it.
Roger?
Thanks, Chair. I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation. I mean, I was on the cabinet when we agreed the original demolition of the Vic Helms, and it was always intended that we would rebuild on Skelders, Weaklands, Newsteads. So really pleased to see that happening at long last. And also, as we've heard, there is a need for affordable housing, a need for social housing. So really pleased to see schemes coming forward. I personally have no problem with the robust design. I would much rather we built houses that last 50, 60, 70 years rather than the Vic Helms that only lasted 30 years. So I think it's the right approach. Pre-stories, we have lots of pre-story private developments and touching 4 stories across the city. It's becoming fairly standard. So I think where it suits the character of the area, I really don't have a problem with the 4 stories. I think my only frustration is the issue of sustainability. And I accept that you can put the photovoltaics on relatively straightforwardly, but we should be putting them on at the beginning, and particularly in terms of ground source and air source heat pumps. It's so expensive to retrofit. So any opportunity to build new, we need to not only do what we're doing here, which is fabric first and much better insulation, which is really positive and I welcome, but we also need to, have some energy heating source in, because Sheffield winters remain cold, and we do need to think about that element too. So that's my only frustration, and I say I fully accept the need to get the density up, and we're going to have other sites where we're going to be challenged on that density. So I welcome the site and I welcome the scheme, and pleased that we're getting affordable housing back to Sheffield. Thank you, Chair.
Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm slightly concerned about, if I've understood this correctly, that we are compromising on space between buildings to make them slightly bigger inside. I hope that's not a precedent that private developers will take on board. And also, I think regarding the apartment blocks, I fully understand they're needed, and I love the idea of the sort of cradle-to-grave community. It's unfortunate they are where they are. That's probably the only place you can have them, but they will have an impact because of their bulk, not necessarily their height, just their bulk on those neighbours. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, ready to go to the vote then? Work my way around. The officer's recommendation is to accept. Peter?
4, Chair.
Okay, Brian?
4, Chair.
Richard?
4, Chair.
Oh, good. Dan?
4, Chair.
Gary? Zahir?
4, Chair.
Roger?
4, Chair.
Tony?
4, Chair.
Tim?
4, Chair.
Alan?
4, Chair.
Andrew?
4, Chair.
And Chris?
4, Chair.
And me, 4. A unanimous decision again. Thank you all very much. Right. Item 8, record of planning appeal submissions and decisions.
Chair, I think pretty straightforward. The first 2 were delegated decisions, but the appeals were dismissed, but committee members didn't see those in the first place. The last one was in relation to an enforcement matter, but the inspector disagreed with us in terms of the kind of level of time we'd have to take enforcement action. We anticipated that it was 10 years, and they said it was 4 years, so that's on a technicality. So I don't think there's any particular learning lessons for members, Chair.
Happy to receive that. Okay. Date and time of the next meeting is down there, 2 o'clock, 27th of July. Okay, thank you all for your attendance.